Welcome to Fantasy Audiobook. Journey through the Marvel Universe starting from the Zombie Universe. Chapter 31. Why are you just looking, Odin? Bayi was startled when he saw the blonde man drinking heavily in front of him, and asked silently in his heart. As the protector of the Nine Realms, why didn't Odin, a bad old man, take action in this crisis? This can be said to be one of the biggest doubts in the original plot. Even if you take a step back, Odin has become disheartened and no longer interested in using force, but when his son and subordinates were chased and bitten by zombies, at least it is also possible to have Heimdall open the Rainbow Bridge and bring back the Asgardians in Midgard. But he did nothing. Hogun, Volstagg and Fandral, as the three kind-hearted and upright warriors in the hearts of the Asgardian people, naturally entered the battlefield as soon as the zombie crisis broke out, but in the plot, he did not receive help from Asgard until his death. Not to mention Thor, as the future god king of Asgard, being infected into a flesh-eating zombie is simply a great shame and humiliation. The Avengers just ate and ate and ate all the way, and the aliens from all walks of life exclaimed, "We encountered zombies." Odin still did nothing until Thor was incinerated by Steve's misfired cosmic power. You must know that although Odin in the comics is also a bad old man, he is different from the one in the movie universe who sticks to the golden throne almost every day from beginning to end. Although his beard is all white, he does not look older at all. He can carry his shoulders, he can hit with his hands, and he still has the heart to control 10 women at night. How could such a strong man shrink back in the face of the end of the world? Thor grinned widely and raised his eyebrows slightly. He shook the beer can and said, "No, I don't know." His silly smile was innocent and carefree, just like a child's. His smile was contagious and filled the entire cabin, making the atmosphere suddenly cheerful. Seeing Thor's silly smile, Bayi couldn't help but laugh. He was infected by Thor and felt a childlike innocence that he had never experienced since he grew up. Bayi looked at Thor's silly smile, and the corners of his mouth began to twitch crazily involuntarily. He tried hard to control his expression and forced a smile. He suddenly understood why almost every Loki looked at Thor as if he were a retard. By the way, where is Loki? After hearing this, Thor finally became more serious. He took a few more gulps of wine, scratched his hair and said, "I haven't seen Loki for a long time, at least a year or two, but my brother is very smart. He is also very good at illusions, he will definitely be able to turn disaster into good luck." Bayi shook his head. He could hardly get any useful information from Thor. At this stage, Thor could only hold 3 things in his mind: hammer, women, and wine. But since it is said to be basic, there is still some useful information. Loki is gone. This is worth thinking about. Not every Loki in the universe can become the god of stories at the end of time. Most Loki's are just liars who are greedy for life and afraid of death. But Loki can't predict, so how did he know to hide? Recalling the major event of Origin of Fear, Odin of the main universe even had the idea of blowing up the earth and running away with Asgard, but he did this to protect Thor from being killed by the big snake. Odin in the 616 universe is undoubtedly a good father and cares about his son. So what if the Odin of this universe doesn't care so much about his son, but cares more about Asgard? Thinking of this, Bayi couldn't help but look at Thor with a hint of sympathy. If this conjecture is correct, then Thor may have been regarded as an abandoned son by Odin early on, just like a gecko's broken tail when escaping, throwing away the useless part to preserve his own safety. Although this has ruined a good son who can play and drink, Asgardians have extremely long lifespans. They might not be able to hide in a mysterious dimension and wait for all life in the universe, including those zombies, to die, and then start again. Return to the material universe and strive for dominance. By then, Galactus is dead. The Avengers have become a thing of the past, all interstellar empires have collapsed due to the invasion of zombie heroes, and the new life in the entire universe is still rolling around in pots of life soup. It is really lost. The vast white land is so clean. And Asgard, who had preserved his power for centuries, reappeared in the universe at this time, sowing the seeds of faith wherever primitive life sprouted, and became the greatest being in the entire universe in one fell swoop. The more he thought about it, the more he was right. Bayi couldn't help but sigh. How could he mess up the universe with such a coward? Oh no, God. Just as Bayi was deep in thought, a pilot interrupted his thoughts. "Ladies and gentlemen, Latveria has arrived." Upon hearing this, Bayi immediately stood up from his seat, and then others also gathered near the window and kept exclaiming. However, what they saw was completely different from what they expected. The streets of Latveria were empty of zombies, like a dead wasteland. There are no bloodthirsty monsters or raging demons, just quiet streets and lush vegetation. Because this only means that there are far more dangerous beings here than those super-powered zombies. He glanced at the changing expressions of the others and knew they realized it too. Although there were no traces of zombies on the ground, they could all feel a vague sense of uneasiness. Do. This is the control tower of the capital of Latveria. Please give your aircraft number, otherwise we will shoot you down. Suddenly, the communication system was connected, and a voice called himself Latveria came from the tower, asking the people on the Quinjet to report their names immediately. This sudden communication made the people on board the Quinjet tense and alert for a moment. Bayi immediately stepped forward, grabbed the communicator, and responded, "We are agents from S.H.I.E.L.D. Please inform us of landing instructions or other necessary information." There was silence on the other side of the tower. After a short silence, another voice came, with a hint of dissatisfaction and depression in the voice. "Latveria will take severe action against any aircraft that enters the airspace without authorization. You have 30 seconds. Time, immediately adjust the flight direction and leave our airspace." Rolling his eyes, Bayi responded. "Tower, we are agents from S.H.I.E.L.D. We have been tasked to lead the invisible woman Susan to Latveria to perform key operations. The purpose of our mission is to get in touch with the local leaders and implement a cooperation plan." After saying that, he put down the walkie-talkie and looked at Fort Dome looming in the distance with a relaxed expression. It was so beautiful. The pilot stared at the numbers on the timer, filled with anxiety and tension. His palms were sweating from holding the control rod tightly, and cold sweat was dripping from his forehead. Every second felt like a long, brutal torture. 30 seconds were coming, and he felt that time seemed to become slow and heavy. He stared out the window, looking for any sign, for fear that once time passed, missiles would be launched at them. His heartbeat quickened and his breathing became rapid. He kept swallowing, trying to relieve his nerves. But no matter what, he couldn't avoid the fear and uneasiness in his heart. At this time, a hoarse person who seemed to have some electronic tuning mixed in suddenly said on the communication channel. "Land, Doom has given you permission. Come with me, T'Challa, we're not far from my laboratory, hold on." Ant-Man slowly concentrated his strength. In a few breaths, his body changed from normal size to a giant nearly 10 meters tall. He used his huge palm to gently grab the corner of a burned-out car and pulled it away, pushing open the path to the alley. When Ant-Man twisted his neck back to normal size, he turned back to Black Panther and smiled. T'Challa was breathing heavily, and the clothes on his body were badly damaged. Only the tight black leather mask on his body was intact. Fortunately, he was not injured by those monsters. The Black Panther raised his head with difficulty. "Hank, are we separated from the main force?" Hank Pym didn't seem to hear the Black Panther's question. He poked his head at the entrance of the alley, seemingly checking whether there were infected people in the dark alley. "Oh my God, T'Challa, did you see what the American colonel looked like after he was bitten by that monster? In a few seconds, he turned into an irrational man-eating monster and ate the female reporter alive. Although I saw it with my own eyes, until now I still can't believe that the most upright man in the world would hurt the person he wants to protect." Hearing this, T'Challa's face instantly became sad. This matter was indeed very strange, but he could not do anything now. He could only pray silently in his heart that the virus would not be transmitted to Wakanda. In this way, Wakanda's scientists will have time to develop an antidote. I believe that with the power of unparalleled high technology, we will be able to overcome this crisis. Suddenly, T'Challa's eyes suddenly fell on Ant-Man's belly. He was surprised to find that Hank seemed to be covering something with his hands, and there was blood oozing out between his fingers. He couldn't help but screamed, "Hank! What happened to your stomach? Were you bitten by those zombies?" "No, it was not a bite, but a scratch from the steel bar." "How could you think that way? My friend. I'm not infected. You don't have to worry. Let's move on. We are very close to the laboratory. Only then can we take a rest and save people." Hank's voice had a hint of displeasure, and the left half of his face was obscured by shadows, making it impossible to see his expression clearly. As soon as he finished speaking, he walked into the dark alley alone without waiting for the Black Panther to react. Hearing this, and Hank's attitude of taking the lead, T'Challa couldn't help but dispel some of his doubts. After all, just when he was surrounded by more than a dozen zombies when he ran out of ammunition, Hank suddenly appeared, grew bigger, and he took out a bunch of things and smashed them to save himself, and said he would take him to the safe house. Besides, if he was infected, Hank should hurry up and find an antidote instead of saving people on the street. If Hank was infected, how could he still be traveling with him? This makes absolutely no sense logically. Thinking of this, T'Challa couldn't wait to give himself a big mouth for having no answers just now. He actually judged a gentleman with a villain's heart and misunderstood an Avengers veteran who had saved his life. Sure enough, he is getting old. After this crisis is over, he will marry Storm and live in seclusion in Wakanda. This world is becoming increasingly incomprehensible to him. As soon as he stepped into the invisible alley, he suddenly discovered that Ant-Man who had just entered the alley was missing. An ominous premonition came over him, the Panther's heartbeat quickened and his muscles tensed. Was Hank attacked, or has he gone too far out of anger? Subconsciously, T'Challa wanted to turn around and leave here, but the moment he turned his head, a huge slap came to him, and his pupils instantly dilated. Bang! There was only a loud noise, and the Black Panther's body violently collided with the wall. The bricks of the wall collapsed one after another, and dust flew everywhere. His body fell limply to the ground like a rag doll, making no sound. And the huge slap quickly became smaller, and finally grabbed the leg of the unconscious Black Panther. Sorry, old friend. Hank took off his mask and carried T'Challa with a frosty face, but instead of walking into the alley, he walked towards a store across the street. He tapped lightly on the wall with his free hand. After a few clicks, the bricks clicked backwards, revealing a secret door. Dragging the Black Panther inside, he seemed to be talking to himself or to his old friends. I've seen what it's like to be infected with the virus, and I don't want to be without food when I end up like the Colonel and them. I don't want you to understand that. The appetite of creatures infected by these viruses increases wildly and without any restraint. In less than a few weeks, those infected superpowers can eat every living person in the world. I really want to turn back time and not get infected by that virus, but now it's done and I'm going to be one of them in a few minutes. As he spoke, Ant-Man dragged the unconscious Black Panther into a secret room. In the center of the secret room was a metal operating table, the smooth surface reflecting a faint light. Ant-Man gently strapped Black Panther to the operating table, making sure he was securely held there. He stood next to the operating table and looked at the Black Panther's body. He picked up a bone saw and gently rubbed the blade with his fingers. And you will be my little midnight snack. The blade of the bone saw lightly touched T'Challa's skin, leaving a shallow cut on T'Challa's left arm. The blade stopped abruptly and was finally put away. I can already feel that hunger burning in the pit of my stomach and starting to crawl up my esophagus, but it's too early to eat you yet. Hank Pym, whose face had turned a little livid, threw the bone saw knife into the metal bucket, rummaged through the box and found several tubes of anesthetic, and injected them all into T'Challa's body. Sleep a little longer, Your Majesty the King. When you wake up again, you will no longer have to worry about your people. After that, Ant-Man put on his hood, walked out of the secret room and locked the door. His height instantly expanded several times and turned into a giant several stories tall, and he ran into the distance with long strides. He recalled the two messages he had just received. One was that the American colonel asked all zombie heroes to return to the Avengers house to discuss major issues. Second, there was the little Janet who bit her. This guy actually had the nerve to invite her to dinner, but for the sake of the meat, let's forgive her for the time being. Hank, who was striding forward, paused for a moment, then leaned down and grabbed a figure that looked familiar. It seemed to be someone from the demolition team, the guy in yellow who was playing with the iron ball. Please, I will change my ways. I will never rob again. Please don't eat me. Hank's fingers clenched around Thunderball's body like steel, and Thunderball struggled and let out a cry of despair. With his strength, it was impossible to escape from the clutches of the giant in front of him. He once boasted to the pile driver that his strength could compete with the god of thunder. He suddenly regretted saying that now. And that was his last thought. The tall giant just smiled ferociously and ruthlessly threw the piece of meat into his mouth the size of a locomotive. The sound of chewing echoed in the air. It tastes wonderful. Looking at the charred corpses, zombies and ruins along the way, Hank inevitably felt a little regretful. He shouldn't have just used his huge body to eat up the guy from the demolition team in 2 bites. This is my first time being a zombie. Creatures that have been dead for more than 10 minutes taste like eating mud, and chewing a zombie into your mouth is like eating shit. Right now, these zombie heroes are completely eating like crazy with an attitude of trying to catch the fish. They often catch one person and take 2 bites before throwing them to the ground to bite another one. In this way, they bite more than 10 people and don't even get half full. I really calculated it right. If this goes on for a long time, there will be nothing left to eat in the world. Then he thought about the Black Panther imprisoned in the basement, and Hank couldn't help but smile at the corner of his bloody mouth. Fortunately, he was smart and knew how to stock up on food from the beginning, so that when these idiots had nothing to eat in the future, he would still be there. You can sneak into the basement and have a good meal. Yes, you can also become the size of an ant, so that the 2 ounces of meat on T'Challa can be eaten for a longer period of time. His whole body was excited because of this wonderful fantasy. Eating alone was a double satisfaction both mentally and physically. Even now, I have to pretend to be a little bit different, and I must not let anyone notice that I have hidden a piece of meat, not even Janet. Arriving at the Avengers' house, Ant-Man shrank his body to normal size and pushed open the door with one palm. If he had a mirror in front of him now, he would be able to see his dry and hollow face. Is anyone there? Jarvis, he shouted loudly, but he couldn't hide the weird voice. Different from the movie universe, in many comic universes, Tony Stark really has a human butler named Jarvis, just like Alfred from Batman Next Door, but Jarvis is not very popular and does not how come there are so many appearances. And now, Hank just wants to have a feast with Jarvis. He noticed the bloodstains on the ground, which seemed to have some kind of guiding effect. An instinct drove him to follow the bloodstains. He paced forward, with strange but fast steps. The halls of Avengers' house had lost their former splendor in his eyes, and were now a stage of horror filled with mutilated remains. Trails of blood guided Ant-Man through corridors, rooms, and stairs, and he bit his lower lip tightly, feeling an overwhelming excitement. His goal became clearer and clearer. He knew someone was here and there was fresh meat waiting for him. His movements became more urgent, rushing forward wildly. The bloody path eventually led him to a room with a door ajar. He stared at the door, saliva dripping with rancid smell. Ha ha ha, I didn't eat enough outside, but it's the same now if I eat enough. He laughed wildly and kicked open the door, ready to enjoy those delicious meals. It's just that the scene in the room is a bit unsatisfactory. The American Colonel, Luke Cage and others are enjoying a meal together. The American Colonel turned his head, his eyes sparkling with excitement and hunger. He stretched out his rotten arm, grabbed a piece of meat, and stuffed it into his mouth. His voice was hoarse and full of desire, and he almost roared, "Pim! Come on, although you are a step late, there is fresh flesh and blood here. Come join us in the carnival, and we will share a bite with you." The wasp girl who was lying aside also turned around and shouted happily, "Welcome home, hubby. When your piece of delicious and juicy meat rotates between my teeth, I know that you will eventually join us." Quote. But Hank didn't step forward directly. He scratched his hair with his blood-stained hands and couldn't help but ask, "Then what's next? Why don't we formulate, an Avengers plan or something like that?" Quote. How many people have we killed in just this moment, and we don't expect any way to atone for the mistakes we have committed. Hawkeye looked sad at first, with a bit more sadness on his face, but the next second he changed back to his hungry look. "Look at what you mean, don't you want to eat?" Hank waved his hands repeatedly, indicating that he didn't mean that. "What the hell? I'm hungry and I'm about to eat. Let me tell you, there's nothing wrong with this now." Agree. Several zombies in the room responded in unison. Soon, these zombie heroes had eaten their fill, sat on the ground with their big bellies to eat, and started chatting along the way. Of course, the content of the chat now is no longer about how many good things you did today or how many people I saved, but about where you can get the softest and most tender meat. "You just hiccuped and said you had a plan, Pim. Then I really have a plan." The American Colonel, who had eaten and drank enough, stood up unsteadily and patted his belly. Ah, Hank was picking his teeth with his hand. When he heard this, he turned back to the leader of the Avengers. He was not thinking about finding the antidote and turning back into a human being. This is too disrespectful. After doing so many things, don't you feel ashamed to still want to be a hero? The zombie wearing the stars and stripes grinned ferociously, its mouth twisted into a hungry slit, revealing sharp teeth and broken teeth, with a fishy breath. We haven't seen Fury yet. S.H.I.E.L.D. has been sending people to stop us from spreading this gospel. Ha, what do they have in mind? Apart from giving me 2 more mouthfuls of meat, what else can they do? Luke Cage bared his fangs, laughed and slapped his chest. What he said was true. Fury sent out 3 teams with heavy firepower in an attempt to eliminate Wonder Man, but it was a pity that those guns couldn't even leave any white marks on his body. That's right, although they didn't cause us any real trouble, they are still very annoying. No one wants to be suddenly shot with a rocket while eating meat, right? The American colonel sneered and saw the zombies around him shaking their heads before continuing with satisfaction. They can't deal with us now, but if they find that there are no civilians in the whole city and throw a few nuclear bombs, who of you are confident that they can survive? Now Luke Cage is silent. It is true that his skin can withstand various bullets and even missiles, but nuclear bombs. Here's the meat, he really hasn't tried it, and he doesn't really want to try what it would feel like if a nuclear bomb hit him. The feeling must be unpleasant. Come on, Colonel, what can you do? We all listen to you. Hawkeye threw away the bones with a few shreds of meat in his hand, stood up and clenched his fists, shouting. Even if they become zombies, the status among the Avengers has not changed much. The Colonel is still the leader of the team, and you must listen to him no matter what happens. Go and find Nightcrawler. I saw him eating people in Central Park back then, and all the guys who can fly and fight. Find them all. Tell them it's time. The American colonel bent slowly and grasped his shield with rotten fingers. Most of the red, white and blue coating on the shield's surface has peeled off, exposing the shiny metal underneath. It made a dull metallic friction sound when it was picked up, as if it was the last resistance in the dead silence. Avengers, assemble. The Quinjet slowly landed in a temporarily cleared open space. The strong airflow blew up dust and confetti all over the ground. The hatch opened and Bayi and his group stepped out of the plane. Susan's eyes were still red, and she obviously still couldn't get over the fact that her husband was dead. The stone man scratched his head and didn't know what to do. He wanted to comfort him but couldn't say anything. He had never lost his husband, so he really didn't know what to say. Since Ben Grimm became a stone man, apart from his skin turning into an indestructible layer of khaki stone, there is nothing different from before. He is still so warm-hearted and has such a sense of humor. It was this layer of stone that turned him into a superhero and turned his life into a mess. Unlike Colossus or Sandman, who can freely change forms, Ben has to do this for the rest of his life, whether it's going to the toilet, eating, or anything else. When the Fantastic Four were all in college together, he still had a crush on Susan, but now that he was like this, he didn't dare to express it. He didn't even dare to think about it. On the day of Reed and Susan's wedding, Ben got really angry and smashed the laboratory. Don't get me wrong, as an honest man, he had no thoughts about his friend's wife. He just looked at everyone in the 4 heroes except himself. It's really hard for everyone to have a happy and wonderful life. Susan is beautiful, can become invisible, and can use telekinesis. Johnny was already good at flirting with girls, but now that he's a superhero, he's even more out of control. Reed, let's put it this way, his flexibility is very useful in various aspects, and the couple's life is very harmonious. As for Ben, the neighbors who have been familiar with him since he was a child now think he is a monster, and I can't blame them. After all, his appearance is too weird. Sometimes he even laughed at himself in his heart. This combination was basically the Fantastic Three and the stone monster they were responsible for beating people up with. And now that Reed is dead, apart from feeling a little empty in his heart, Ben is not too sad and even has a feeling of, it's a good death. The first moment this thought came up, Ben hit his stone head hard twice. After all, Reed can be regarded as his teammate for many years. It really shouldn't be thought like this. But looking at Susan's sad look, Ben couldn't help scolding Reed in his heart. How come this fool couldn't turn around today after being so smart for so many years? I don't even want to think about how Franklin and Vere died. A few hours ago, the infected She-Hulk opened the secret room of the Baxter Tower, and then she used her bloody mouth. In the end, the stone man reached out and patted Susan on the shoulder and said, "Stop thinking, Sue, let the past be bygones. We have to learn to look forward." The invisible woman said nothing, just stared at the air in a daze. Bayi stood on the ground, surrounded by desolation. The land was cracked and the grass and trees were withered. It seemed that no one had set foot here for a long time. There seemed to be a tumbleweed rolling by in the distance. "Brother, are you sure this is where we should land?" He turned to the right with a stiff neck and looked at the pilot, who was also confused. "There is not even a shadow of Doom Castle here. Is this really their destination?" The pilot hurriedly replied, "Yes, Mr. Bayi, these are the coordinates that Dr. Doom told me personally. They are absolutely correct." Looking at the innocent look on the pilot's face, and then looking around, he saw a deserted area in the distance without any trace of human habitation or buildings. Bayi sighed helplessly. "Wanda, tell everyone to come to me." Soon, a group of 7 people gathered around Bayi, waiting for his order. "Use me as the center of the circle and gather in a defensive formation. I want to see what is going on." After saying that, Bayi gently touched the pendant around his neck. Something was really wrong here. When the plane passed by here just now, there were many European-style buildings on the ground, but now there are none. Something fishy. A warm energy came from the amulet around his neck, and then his soul began to slowly leave his body. At first, he felt a light floating sensation, as if being blown by a gentle wind. He looked up and saw his still body, seemingly lost in thought. This is the astral projection stored in the pendant. Most mages use this spell to travel around the outer space and improve their understanding of the magical world. At this moment, it is really overkill as a simple out-of-body experience. But it's just right to use it here to explore. Anyway, if you save it, you won't be able to lay eggs and produce astral projections a few times. Bayi's soul was suspended quietly in midair, looking up and down, staring at his petrified body. His face seemed to be frozen in a dazed expression, and his eyes were empty and blurred. If it weren't for the slight trembling of his nose, he almost thought he was a dead person in front of him. And Thor and others were posing in their respective postures, forming a circle and placing themselves inside the circle. With a swing of his arms, he chose a direction and floated out. As his soul gradually moved away from his body, a cold feeling began to spread, as if his connection with the real world was gradually estranged. As the distance drifted farther and farther, Bayi could feel the cold breath more and more, reminding him to always be vigilant. Bayi's soul struggled against the cold feeling and drifted hundreds of meters outward. He looked across the void, looking around, and suddenly found that the wasteland had completely disappeared, replaced by a dark void space. In this boundless darkness, a strange man in a metal mask wearing a green cloak and a hood tilted his head to look at Bayi's soul state. At this moment, although Bayi had no sweat glands, he still subconsciously felt cold sweat pouring out. His soul seemed to be stared at by a terrifying evil beast, and a chill that was 100 times stronger than when the soul was separated from the body penetrated into the bone marrow. As soon as he slapped his chest, his soul turned into a stream of light and returned to his body almost instantly. Bayi opened his eyes suddenly, and the real flesh on his body was instantly soaked with cold sweat. Cold sweat poured out from his forehead and dripped on his cheeks, forming a string of clear water drops. He clenched his fists tightly and felt the sweat in his palms. "Thor, at 10 o'clock, throw the hammer gently." "Ah, what do you mean?" Thor looked at the sweaty guy in front of him and was a little confused. What kind of throwing method is gentle? Where does the gentleness of fighting and fighting come from? Bayi wiped his sweat, thought for a moment and then quickly added, "Don't use too much force. Just throw it like you usually do when you quarrel with Tony, just throw it now." "Oh, I understand if you say that." Thor smiled heartily and flicked it away. The hammer flew out crookedly, jumping up and down in the air like a bird drunk on fake wine. The hammer sometimes drifts to the left, sometimes shakes to the right, sometimes bumps up and down, and sometimes swings left and right. On the surface of the hammer, the electric sparks still shone faintly, but they lacked the sharpness of the past. Their beating frequency slowed down significantly, and their movements became sluggish and soft, as if some small meandering people were dancing on them. He usually uses this strength to fight Iron Man. The soft hammer floated in the air for a while, and then a few hundred meters away from Thor, it suddenly made a loud noise, as if it had hit a solid wall. As the rumbling sound came out, a cloud of dust rose up in the air and filled the air. There does not seem to be an obvious impact point for the dust to form, but rather the entire area is shrouded in mist. There should have been an empty wasteland there, but now there was only a vast expanse of dust, making it difficult to see the specific scene. Thor frowned, confused by this sudden change. He looked through the dust, trying to discern the truth. However, no matter how hard he stared, he could not see the details in the dust. He could only see fuzzy particles flying in the sky. Yeah, it's a little hot. Bayi calmly took a sip of the water handed to him by the pilot. He was not surprised at all. From what he had just seen, this place was probably not the tarmac or wasteland of Latveria at all. It's some kind of place like the X-Men's Extremis room. Suddenly, a strange, buzzing sound sounded from all directions, and the land beneath their feet began to gradually become illusory, as if they were in a dream. The scene in front of him began to distort and change, and quickly transformed into a metal ground. The metal ground shimmered, reflecting the dazzling metallic light. They are like countless small squares spliced together to form the structure of the entire ground. This scene shocked everyone, and they stared at the changes happening around them with their mouths open. What the hell is this place? Should I move? Oh wait, I'm still wearing a restraint. Fury. Pietro screamed in shock for the first time, but he tugged on the metal ring around his neck and muttering softly. Use telekinesis when it's time to use telekinesis, make fists when necessary, and load the gun when necessary. Several other obviously well-trained superheroes are ready for battle. But the changes on the ground have not stopped. The metal ground seems to be controlled by invisible forces, as if a huge picture is rolling and changing. The dust in the desert is flying, the cold wind is howling on the snow-capped mountains, the neon lights are flashing in the city, the waves are turbulent in the ocean, all kinds of elements are rushing towards you, and every change is lifelike. Finally, the buzzing sound dissipated, and the ground solidified into a silver-white metal as smooth as a mirror, reflecting the scorching light and making it dazzling. As soon as the squinting pilot raised his head, he screamed, "Look at the sky, look at the sky. Is that a bird? Is that a plane? That's it. I saw countless metal robots as dense as black clouds flying down from high in the sky. They were wearing green hooded cloaks and exuding a silver sheen. After landing, the robots lined up in rows and moved forward at the same time. With each step, the metal footsteps made a steady and powerful metal collision sound, which seemed to shake the entire space. The robots' palm cannons flashed with green energy and made a low buzzing sound, like a machine's war cry. Energy flows within it, exuding a shuddering aura of destruction. Their eyes were locked on everyone indifferently, and the sound of the palm cannon seemed to announce the approaching death. It seems that a fierce battle is about to begin. Thor has already tightened his grip on Mjolnir, who is back in his hand. As soon as Bayi speaks, he will let the destruction robots created by Doom in front of him enter the cyber hell and meet the cyber Buddha. Son of Odin, if you dare to take action, Doom will never let you off lightly. Just when the scene was about to break out, a low threat was heard from the crowd, and then among a large number of robots that looked exactly the same, a metal strongman with a more powerful figure and stronger armor appeared floating up. As he floated higher, the other robots stepped back one after another, as if leaving a passage for him, leaving him alone floating in midair and approaching. After glancing around at everyone present, especially taking a second look at Bayi, Dr. Doom slowly said, "Why did you come to Doom's territory?" After hearing what Dr. Doom said, the Punisher couldn't help but cursed, "The iron-faced fool." Holding the gun in his hand, Frank's intention was obvious. He planned to raise the muzzle of the gun and attack Dr. Doom. In this doomsday world, killing one more villain would be a profit, and killing two would be even more satisfying. However, just when he was about to pull the trigger, Bayi quickly reached out and grasped the barrel of the Punisher tightly, pressing down. "Do not worry." Angrily, the Punisher loosened his grip on the gun and put it back into his holster. His eyes still revealed anger towards Dr. Doom, but he decided to follow Bayi's advice, put aside his personal emotions temporarily, and put the interests of the team first. Ahem. We came here just to save Latveria. Bayi cleared his throat and took half a step forward. Save? Doom sneered. Latveria is immune to this virus. Doom does not need S.H.I.E.L.D's assistance, nor does he need you. Bayi narrowed his eyes. The immunity Doom mentioned was of course not referring to the antidote to the zombie virus in Latveria. He meant that he could survive this apocalypse with just his own strength. This is of course nonsense. No matter how easy it is to defend and attack Fort Dome, it is still no match for those zombie heroes. Not to mention that Latveria is often treated as an experience pack by various superheroes on weekdays. How does he have such a situation? Confidence. For such a confident and arrogant guy, he definitely can't be tough. The few people on his side are reasonable and Doom is naturally no match. But if he does this, he will only blow up the teleporter with his backhand before defeating him. He can only be soft. I take back what I just said. Dr. Doom really doesn't need any assistance from S.H.I.E.L.D., but we can have a chat. Why? After glancing at the silent invisible woman, Bayi raised his head and smiled at the man in the iron mask who was looking at people through his nostrils. Just because I killed Reed Richards. After hearing this, Susan was stunned, looked up at Bayi, but neither got angry nor said anything. She just lowered her head and remained silent. Now she has calmed down. There is no doubt that Reed is dead, but she doesn't want to face this fact, but she can't hate anyone. She could only hate herself for not being able to recognize the beast in his heart after so many years with Reed. After all, she is still a veteran superhero, and she is completely incapable of doing things like helping her relatives but not taking care of others. HMPH. Only Doom can kill Doom's enemies. As soon as Doom said this, everyone was shocked, not because they were surprised by his pride, but because when he said this, he probably didn't want to talk about it. However, Doom looked through the iron mask at the self-pitying Susan, and his steely tone finally softened. Doom can listen to how that idiot Reed died. Quote, "Come in, Doom will entertain you." As soon as he finished speaking, the robots once again made way for them. Looking at the people who were looking at each other, Bayi shrugged and walked over. Dr. Doom led a group of people into Fort Doom. He walked in front, majestic. The castle seemed slightly dark, but the lit candles emitted a faint light, barely illuminating the surrounding environment. The walls are made of solid stone with clear grains, revealing traces of time. The texture of the stones highlights the ancient and solid atmosphere, as if it carries countless historical deposits. Under the candlelight, the textures and stone patterns on the walls are clearly visible, forming fine patterns. There is an ancient atmosphere permeating Doom Castle, exuding a strong sense of mystery. The walls are carved with exquisite patterns and sculptures, showing the ingenious craftsmanship and beauty of art. Bayi glanced at the flash of green light on the wall. The murals and stone statues carved in Fort Dome were probably not just for good looks. I said, "Vic, why are you taking us around here?" Ben couldn't help shouting. He had been fighting zombies all afternoon, and he didn't eat anything on the space aircraft carrier. He was already very hungry. Without saying a word, Doom led everyone through every corner of the castle, and finally came to a large room. The atmosphere of this room is slightly different from the previous gloom. It exudes a touch of solemnity and magnificence. A huge colored glass chandelier hangs from the top of the room, like a shining gem. The glass on the chandelier is crystal clear, with delicate patterns intertwined with light. Exudes a soft and warm glow. In the center of the room is a huge and narrow wooden dining table, its width taking up almost half of the entire room. The dining table is covered with a gorgeous tablecloth, and the golden patterns complement the lights in the room. Candles in metal trays were placed on the table. When they were lit, they emitted a soft light that reflected the contours of everyone's faces. Sit. Doom swung his cloak and sat on the large main seat. The moment he sat down, the room seemed to become even colder. Several people exchanged glances and each found a place to sit down. He shook the bell in his hand and made a slight ringing sound. This simple action seemed to declare Doom's control and dominance over everything. The waiters standing around knew immediately and began to act quickly. Soon, the waiters in neat black tuxedos held silver trays and walked lightly to Dr. Doom's seat. Their manners were solemn, elegant and silent, as if actors on the stage were performing a wonderful mime. Golden and crispy roasted suckling pig, creamy mushroom soup sprinkled with a pinch of crispy bread crumbs as a garnish, tender steaks, juicy grilled chicken and tender fish were placed in front of the host. After serving Doom, the waiters walked out of the room and served delicious food to the guests. A huge hand grasped the front of the yellow school bus and easily crushed it into a ball of metal fragments, making a harsh clicking sound, and screams could be heard in the car. It's easier to eat when you're smaller, but it's so fun to eat like this. Ant-Man looked in through the breach with his eyes the size of car tires, laughed wildly, his voice was low and hoarse, and stretched his huge arms in. Picking up a few tender red berries with his fingers, Bayi put them into his mouth without hesitation, gently biting the pulp with his teeth, and a strong sweet smell rolled on his tongue. Each fruit was like a small world, broken into countless tiny particles in his mouth, and a few drops of bright red juice spilled from the corners of his mouth, forming a few drops of crystal clear blood. I said, Doom, are you still eating at this time? Don't you have the slightest concern about the end of the world? Pietro sat at the dining table and looked at the full banquet in front of him. In the end, he couldn't take a bite. Instead, he looked at Doom, who was eating in confusion, with a little confusion in his voice. Dr. Doom put down the fork in his hand, his eyes were cold and proud. He slowly raised his head and responded, being able to eat peacefully is not just to satisfy the needs of the stomach, but a symbol of dignity. In this doomsday moment, it is when Doom's status as emperor is most prominent. Quicksilver frowned, feeling confused and dissatisfied with Dr. Doom's attitude. He muttered softly, but we are facing thousands of super-powered zombies. Don't you feel nervous and anxious? Dr. Doom smiled coldly, glanced at the others, and continued calmly, since you are here, something must be wrong. So, are you here to ask for Doom's help, or are you ready to challenge Doom? Quicksilver was silent for a while, silently thinking about how to answer, but the food on the table was still neatly placed. Dr. Doom seemed to be indifferent to his doubts, and started to eat elegantly. Bayi wiped the corners of his mouth, looked at Doom and asked softly, do you want to know how Reed died? Dr. Doom raised his head, and his deep eyes met Bayi's gaze. Although he did not answer directly, at that moment, Dr. Doom's message to Bayi was clear and unambiguous, say it. Looking at Dr. Doom, Bayi took a deep breath and began to tell the cause of Reed's death. Dr. Doom listened quietly, his eyes gradually became deeper, he put down the fork in his hand, and his body trembled slightly. After listening to the process, Doom, who could no longer suppress his inner excitement and ridicule, suddenly threw his head back and laughed. This laughter did not sound cheerful. His voice was hoarse and distorted, like some evil beast from the depths of hell, roared. Ha ha ha, I didn't expect Richards to be so stupid. After a while, Doom stopped laughing wildly, and the smile under the mask gradually solidified, and turned into coldness and contempt. It's really ridiculous that I have been fighting with such a weakling for so many years. Rarely, Doom did not use his habit of referring to himself in the third person, but spoke like a normal person. When Susan heard this, she immediately glared at Doom, but within a few seconds she lowered her head and remained silent. She knew in her heart that Doom was absolutely right. Reed had successfully proved his intelligence level with his life. What's your name? Richards may be stupid, but Doom should know the name of the person who killed him. Such a person should not be an unknown person in Latveria. White Knight. Very well, Byakuya, you gave Doom a very interesting joke. You are now a guest of Latveria. You can talk about whatever you want. Bayi glanced at Thor, who was busy eating and drinking, smiled slightly, and said calmly, why don't we move on to talk? Thor raised his glass, a trace of confusion flashed in his eyes. He seemed not to fully understand what Bayi meant. He put down the glass and replied in a somewhat vague tone, move. Where? I haven't drunk enough yet. There was a hint of helplessness in Bayi's eyes, and he was not surprised by Thor's attitude. After all, Thor at this stage is a person who is keen on having fun, and talking about things is definitely not as high a priority as working. We might as well continue the conversation in another place. It's too noisy here, Bayi said again calmly. Dr. Doom took a deep look at Bayi, lifted his cloak and walked out of the room. In front is Doom's study, we can chat there. Following Doom, Bayi looked at the corridor he walked through before. It was somewhat similar to when he entered Fort Dome, but it was different. After a few more glances, he found that just a few dozen meters behind him, the ground and walls seemed to be slowly crawling. The corner he had just passed disappeared. It seemed that Dr. Doom had used magic to make this place look like in the existence of a kind of moving maze. Dr. Doom pushed open the wooden door with a creak and entered his study. Bayi followed him. A huge oak desk occupied the center of the room, with splendid stationery and an ancient magic book placed on it. There are countless thick scrolls and books on the bookshelves next to the wall, which should be used to record the results of Dr. Doom's many years of research, whether it is technology or magic. In the corner of the room is a gorgeous coffee table with exquisite tea sets and various rare tea leaves. A comfortable leather sofa and several luxurious chairs are scattered in different corners of the room, providing visitors with a comfortable rest space. It is true that Dr. Doom is a world-famous supervillain, but he is also the head of state of Latveria. Naturally, he also needs a place to receive some high-status visitors, and the study is a good place. Dr. Doom walked slowly to the desk. He sat down and looked at Bayi, who was scanning everything in the office with his eyes. A satisfied and proud smile appeared under his mask. Although he never said it, he enjoyed the moments when others were surprised by his wealth and status. Having had enough of admiring Bayi's look at the study, Doom slowly said, "Tell me. Let's get straight to the point." Bayi sat down in the guest seat, twisted his neck and said, "The firepower you have here is not enough to resist the countless super-powered zombies that are about to attack. You need our help." "What? How dare you humiliate Doom like this?" Doom shouted angrily, slamming the desk with his big metal hand, causing the entire study to shake and the sunlight outside the window disappear for half a second. However, Bayi was not frightened by the movement. He watched the darkness that spread to the chandelier fade away, and said before Doom got angry again, "You can take off your disguise at any time, Dr. Doom. I think we all know, it's only a matter of time before Latveria falls to those monsters. If not, what about your subjects? I don't think we saw anyone along the way except some servants. Where are the men, women, old people and children of Latveria?" The metal monster in front of him stopped talking. He just stared at Bayi where the old god was, waiting for the next words to come out of his mouth. Doom would then decide whether to continue listening or tear the offending creature to pieces. "I know you are building a teleporter, but it will take time to complete." As soon as these words were spoken, Bayi felt a huge pressure on his shoulders in an instant, as if the whole world was leaning towards him, and like a sharp blade sticking close to his back. Bayi's heartbeat quickened, but he still remained calm. Dr. Doom sat behind his desk, staring at Bayi with cold eyes. There was no expression on his iron face, but it was obvious that he had murderous intentions. "You know Doom's secret, give Doom a reason to live. Because I know you're not as stupid as Reed Richards, that's why I came to you to cooperate." The huge pressure disappeared as instantly as it came, and his words had a certain effect, at least able to arouse Dr. Destruction's interest. Dr. Doom silently observed Bayi. His eyes were deep and cold, and he looked at Bayi without any sign of weakness. After a moment, he said expressionlessly, "Go on. It must be some time before your teleporter is completed, otherwise you would have taken the civilians of Latveria to other universes. The superheroes from S.H.I.E.L.D. can help you build it, and at the same time defend Fort Doom with you. But the premise is that you also have to give us some tickets for Noah's Ark." After Dr. Doom listened to Bayi's words, he stood up, waved his hand, and a green holographic projection appeared out of thin air on the desk. Bayi squinted his eyes and stared at the projected scene. In the projection, Captain Britain was in a British-style office, smashing things wantonly, and shouting from his mouth, "If the Legion attacks, everything will be fine." Bayi touched his chin. The Legion that Captain Britain was talking about should be the Legion that Captain Britain was referring to. The main thing was that the Legion was number one and the Legion was the smartest. During the diversified integration, these people were still dealing with some issues that had already been dealt with at a crawling speed. Information about the dying universe. If we have to wait in line for hundreds of years, by then, the 2149 universe will receive assistance from the Legion. Doom looked at Captain Britain in the projection and mocked contemptuously, "This is your hero, praying for help that will never come. Why should Doom expect your help? Johnny Storm is still with S.H.I.E.L.D. So what? Susan Storm is here for you." Bayi shrugged, "If you don't care about Susan, you could just feed her to the zombies. Why let her die in depression after losing a pair of children and a brother?" Seeing Doom hesitate a little, he sighed again, with deep sadness in his brows, and slowly said, Miss Storm is really miserable. She became a widow overnight and lost her child. Her world has completely collapsed. Doom, have you ever thought about how heartless and cruel it is to leave her alone for the rest of her life? And when she learns that you actually let Johnny be eaten by those zombies, how should you face her? After hearing Bayi's words, Dr. Doom's face changed slightly, and he seemed a little unhappy. He replied coldly, "She is just an insignificant mortal. I don't care about her at all. It's okay to lie to me, but don't lie to yourself, Dr. Doom." Bayi shook his head. Look, he even forgot to mention his oral habit. Victor Von Doom doesn't love Susan. It's a big joke. One of the reasons why Dr. Doom tried every means to destroy the Fantastic Four was to separate Susan and Reed, but there was no need for the thing, no one liked him. What could be more gratifying than getting the first secret love you asked for in the first place? You must know that Doom of the 616 universe regards Valea and Franklin, who are half of Susan's blood, as his own, and will never let them be harmed in the slightest. Although this 2149 universe is a remote area, it is impossible to come even if you think about it. It will be too different. No, Doom's relationship status here is much better than that of 616. Reed, the biggest obstacle, has disappeared. It wasn't Doom who killed him. Susan wouldn't even hate him, and then save her. Susan's brother was even more kind to Susan. Bayi sighed deeply again, feeling like she couldn't carry him no matter what. The good widow was given to his face, but why did Dome become so arrogant? Sunere has withdrawn from the environment, and straight shots are popular now. Susan is the most annoying. Stupid, I didn't let you enter Doomburg specifically. Bayi's brain suddenly and uncontrollably recalled the scene of Doom speaking to the invisible woman with a shy face, turning away his half-iron face. He couldn't help but shudder, it was so disgusting. Fortunately, Doom didn't do that in the end. After listening to Bayi's words, Dr. Doom raised his finger and tapped the table gently. Dumb cannot deceive himself. Latveria will form a temporary cooperative relationship with you from now on. His voice was low with a hint of laughter. A sense of oppression. However, when he mentioned the word, you, he deliberately emphasized the emphasis, implying that he prioritized cooperation with Byakuya rather than S.H.I.E.L.D. After saying that, Doom stood up and stretched out his hand to Bayi. Bayi looked at Dr. Destruction's iron hand that was flashing with green light. He smiled, walked over, held it and shook it hard. "It's a pleasure to work with you," he said softly. In this way, by reaching a deal with Doom, escaping from this world that will soon be destroyed will be a sure thing. There is one more thing Doom wants to know. Why did S.H.I.E.L.D. send you here? I just checked all the personnel information of S.H.I.E.L.D. from the cleaning staff to Nick Fury, but there is no information about you. What on earth are you doing? Who is it? I am. Before Bayi could finish speaking, Dr. Doom suddenly raised his hand, and a dim green light emitted from his fingertips, instantly covering Bayi's body. This mysterious energy starts from the top of Bayi's head and gradually covers his entire body downwards, like a thin veil. However, Bayi did not feel any discomfort or pain. He just frowned and stared at Dr. Doom alertly. He tried to understand Dr. Doom's intentions and what the appearance of this green light meant. Well, this is just a spell that removes the disguise. It seems that you are not Loki. Dr. Doom shook his head and added, I thought Loki has never appeared anywhere within the 9 realms in the past few years. The cooperative relationship between Doom and Loki has been shown in most universes, whether they are working together as a behind-the-scenes think tank for Norman Osborn in Dark Reign, or they are also working as wizards to exchange dark magic, etc. Now an unidentified person suddenly appeared in front of him, but he seemed to have a certain say in S.H.I.E.L.D. It was difficult not to remind Doom of Loki, who likes to play role-playing, but now it seems that is not the case. The reason Fury asked me to bring a team over to negotiate with you is because he owes me a lot of favors. And I guess he doesn't want to put himself at risk. After all, you two have been trying to get rid of each other for decades, and there have been many overt and covert confrontations. HMPH. Does he think Doom is such a stingy person? You are indeed the one, Bayi complained in his heart. He still vaguely remembered that one time when Namor almost knelt down and begged Doom to take action, he was ruthlessly rejected. Want to know who Namor is? He has a surly and capricious personality. He likes to stare at all kinds of wives going crazy every day. When he has nothing to do, he squats on the bottom of the sea and secretly makes plans to deceive mankind. At the same time, as the king of a country, he has never done anything like begging for help, thing. But he still chose to beg Doom, and there was only one reason why Dr. Doom refused Namor. He was not the first to come to Doom. Namor had asked others for help before. Do you have a collection here called the Book of the Dead? Doom looked at Bayi and finally uttered one word, yes. Then he walked to the bookshelf and seemed to find the target effortlessly. He pulled out a gray book from the second floor and placed it gently on Bayi. Before. Bayi's eyes narrowed slightly. He felt that the book seemed to have a kind of vitality, as if it was a flesh and blood existence, hiding endless secrets and power. He touched the book lightly, but felt a slight tremor, as if there was some kind of life flowing in the book. Bayi frowned slightly. He observed the book carefully. The writing seemed to be the skin of some kind of creature. The touch is rough and carries a subtle temperature and pulse, as if it has its own vitality. He wasn't sure if it was his imagination, but he seemed to see two small gaps in the writing, slightly cracked, like closed human eyes. This is the book you want. Doom has never used this book. It contains powerful dark magic. Glancing at Bayi, who was stroking the book, Dr. Doom spoke. Hearing this, Bayi felt a little speechless. Because it is black magic, why not use it? Are you kidding me? Dr. Doom is a person who often goes to hell to make deals with demons. How could he be afraid of a small human skin book? However, what he said sounded like he was reminding himself to be cautious in contact with black magic. After all, these things are powerful, but the conditions for casting spells are often sinister and treacherous. There are countless conditions such as offering your heart, tongue and lung slices. The incident of losing half of my body just now is still fresh in my mind. I will keep it in mind. Thank you, doctor, for the gift. Bayi stood up and put the book under his arm, then nodded gently. Yes. Doom nodded slightly and raised his hand to indicate that Bayi could go back. Air and space aircraft carrier. On the tarmac, a cleaner named Old Jack was cleaning a Quinjet that had just returned half an hour ago with a hose. Old Jack was humming a little tune with a cheerful expression. This is his 13th year in this industry, and he is extremely familiar with the job. He was nearly 60 years old and had no children. When the entire space carrier was immersed in the grief of losing his family members, although he was also infected by the atmosphere and shed a few tears, he soon became happy again like a normal person. Because there is really no one in his family. His wife died of a heart attack a few years ago, his parents have passed away for almost 20 years, and he only has a few friends as colleagues, and they are all on the space aircraft carrier. Water gushes out from the water pipe, and Old Jack operates it flexibly, washing the appearance of the fighter plane as clean as new. He moved slowly along the fuselage, stopping occasionally to check if any stains had been missed. When he walked to the Quinjet's hatch, he found that it was closed. Old Jack was not surprised. He pressed the button and the hatch opened smoothly. He walked into the cabin full of curiosity, ready to check the situation inside. Sometimes he can find some things left behind by careless superheroes here, such as hats and glasses. These things can be sold for a lot of money online, and the heroes don't care about throwing them away. Stuff. They don't even know what they've lost. Although it's the end of the world now, he still hasn't gotten rid of this habit. Those small items are his source of income to buy drunk every day. The good days are gone forever, Old Jack sighed in his heart. He didn't expect that those heroes in heaven and earth did not escape the end of the world, but he, the old man, escaped. What kind of world is this? However, the moment he stepped into the cabin door, he suddenly felt a stinging pain on his neck. He exclaimed, "Ah, what is that?" But he soon remembered that it was the breeding season of flying ants, and he might have been bitten by an ant. This kind of thing is not uncommon, and a considerable number of people are bitten by those gadgets almost every year. The pain in his neck made Old Jack feel like there were ants crawling on his body. He quickly wiped his neck with his hand in an attempt to drive away the ants. Then, he decided to leave the hatch and go back below deck to find some soapy water or something to wipe with. What could possibly happen? Ah, strange ceiling. Wong slowly woke up in the hospital bed, and his eyes caught a glimpse of the white ceiling for the first time. Then, he subconsciously turned his head to look left and right, but was suddenly shocked to find Doctor Strange lying on the bed. He shouted in disbelief. Strange, what's wrong with you? How did you get hurt? Wang's voice was filled with panic and worry, and he couldn't ignore Doctor Strange's serious injuries. The left half of Doctor Strange's face was tightly wrapped in bandages, looking very painful. What frightened Wang Ta even more was that the Supreme Mage's left hand and left leg were missing. Facing this cruel reality, Wang felt a sense of powerlessness and fear in his heart. He couldn't understand how Doctor Strange was so seriously injured. What kind of enemy could harm the most powerful sorcerer supreme to such an extent? Doctor Strange felt a little embarrassed when he heard Wang's words. He hesitated and tried to organize his words, which seemed a little difficult to speak. It's easy to tell others about my mistakes, but how should I tell the king, my closest friend and most loyal servant? Oh, I used to. Doctor Strange said with difficulty, his voice carrying a hint of regret and guilt. He paused, trying to find the right words. Facing Wang's concerned gaze, Chi-Chi knew that he needed to be honest, no matter how difficult it was. In the end, Chi-Chi revealed everything. Looking at the silent Wang, he touched the bandage covering his left face and sighed, "That's it. It really makes me embarrassed to see others." Wang shook his head and tried to comfort Doctor Strange. "Strange, you don't have to blame him so much." Bang! However, a loud noise suddenly broke the tranquility of the ward, as if something had hit hard. Both Wang and Doctor Strange raised their heads suddenly, turning their heads in unison to look in the direction of the sound. The door of the ward was shaken again by the impact, as if some external force was trying to enter. "Wang, you came to the space aircraft carrier before me. How are the quality of the nurses here?" "Very good, you shouldn't wake up a patient like this." The two looked at each other and jumped up from the hospital bed at the same time, Wang landing lightly on the ground while Strange was suspended in midair because he had lost one of his legs. Doctor Strange has already made a hand seal with his right hand, and a ball of purple energy is spinning in his hand, exuding a strong magical aura. He shouted at the door, "Whoever you are, stop immediately and identify yourself." His voice echoed in the ward, and after half a second of silence, the door was suddenly hit even more crazily, and the door shook. Doctor Strange narrowed his eyes, and the purple energy rolled more violently, but he finally turned his wrist, and the purple energy instantly turned red, and shouted loudly, "In the name of the Eternal Emperor Waishan, release the depths of Cytoric. Red magic belt." Chanting the name of Lord Vishan while casting spells is like rhyming in rap, producing more magic. As he shouted, the energy rolled and turned into a red energy ribbon, showing amazing power and speed, and it was drawn towards the door like a bolt of lightning. The door was shattered instantly, and the debris flew everywhere. At the same time, the guy who hit the door was tied up with a red energy ribbon and hung in midair. Doctor Strange and Wang stared at the tied guy in shock. Only then did they understand why the person who knocked on the door didn't shout. That guy turned out to be a nurse, or had been one. At this time, its jaw had been bitten to pieces, dripping with blood, and the hideous wounds revealed a horrific scene. Its eyeballs were white and cloudy, staring at the void, and it was still struggling when it was tied up, trying to bite someone. Wang gritted his teeth and shouted, "How could this happen? Isn't even the aerospace aircraft carrier safe here?" But Chi-Chi just sighed, and the crimson magic belt wrapped around the nurse's head, making a crunching and distorting sound. With a crisp sound, the nurse's head was crushed, and various red and white substances sprayed on the ground. "We have to get out of here quickly, Wang," Doctor Strange whispered, and then quickly floated out of the door. Wang also jumped over the body on the ground, followed closely behind. They quickly arrived at the nurse's station, only to find that there was only one person here. There was nothing but blood on the ground. Wang looked around and felt that it was unusually quiet here. The empty nurse station made him feel a little uneasy. Doctor Strange frowned slightly, looked around, and suddenly noticed the surveillance cameras on the wall. He quickly stretched out his hand towards one of the cameras and shook it, and then the camera also shook at him as if it was alive. "Shake." After the camera shook at Doctor Strange, Hill's voice came from inside, "Mr. Strange, please don't move around. The team we sent to clean the medical room will be there soon." Wang was slightly startled. He did not expect to hear Hill's voice. After about a few dozen seconds, a group of heavily armed soldiers rushed over. Wearing heavy bulletproof clothing and holding various weapons, they acted solemnly and focused. The leading soldier held a scanner and quickly pointed it at the bodies of Doctor Strange and Wong to examine them. The scanner made a faint buzzing sound and displayed a series of data on the screen. The soldier carefully observed the results on the scanner and confirmed that the two men were not infected. At the same time, other soldiers divided into groups and kicked open the doors of each room with shotguns, nervously searching whether there were any zombies inside. They moved in tacit understanding and coordination without making a sound. When the door was kicked open, the soldiers entered immediately and scanned every corner of the room in a calm and rapid manner. They quickly scanned beds, closets, and corners to make sure there weren't any hidden threats. After a few minutes, the entire medical room was cleared. The soldiers exchanged information with each other and confirmed that no traces of other zombies were found. After the search was completed, the leading soldier quickly ran to Doctor Strange and Wong, stood at attention and saluted. "Mr. Strange, we have confirmed that the medical room is safe. Please come with us. The director is gathering all survivors." Wong was eager to understand the situation, so he quickly asked, "What happened on the aerospace aircraft carrier? Why are there zombies?" The soldier hesitated for a moment. "We are talking as we walk, time is very urgent. Please follow us to ensure your safety." The two nodded, expressing their understanding, and then followed the soldiers to where Fury was. Along the way, many bodies with their heads shot down fell to the ground, stained with blood, and the faint sound of gunshots in the distance was even more unsettling. Suddenly, they turned a corner, and the leading soldier shouted, "We are here, the director is inside." The soldiers quickly rushed in the other direction, leaving Strange and Wong alone facing a closed metal door. The Supreme Mage took a deep breath, held the doorknob tightly with his hand, and turned it resolutely. The doorknob made a dull sound and the door opened slowly. Doctor Strange pushed open the metal door and saw a scene that surprised him. The room was packed with people, each with a heavy look on their face, but he noticed that they seemed to show no signs of being hurt or having been through a battle. The atmosphere in the room was solemn and quiet. Everyone was watching Doctor Strange's arrival, looking forward to his instructions or hoping to find answers. This made Doctor Strange feel a little strange. He originally thought that the interior of the space aircraft carrier had also been infected by the virus, but the scene in front of him seemed to be different from what he expected. He stepped into the room and glanced at everyone. Among them are medical staff, scientists, soldiers and other superheroes. Everyone has a solemn face, and their eyes reveal fear and worry about the unknown. Strange. While Doctor Strange was still thinking, Wong suddenly patted him on the shoulder and motioned him to look forward. Doctor Strange looked up and saw Nick Fury walking among the crowd, looking serious. Fury walked among the crowd, looked around, and snapped his fingers. A holographic image immediately appeared above his head. The holographic image showed a scene inside the aerospace carrier. It showed a cleaner lying on the pool and vomiting in pain, when a soldier walked in. Seeing this scene, the soldier quickly put the gun on the sink and gently patted the cleaner on the back. "What's wrong, old man? Did you drink too much last night?" However, the next second, the cleaner suddenly turned around and said, biting the soldier's throat. Fury's voice echoed throughout the audience. "Just 10 minutes ago, an infection occurred on the space aircraft carrier. Immediately afterwards, several infections occurred in different places, but when we were investigating, the source of the infection showed up on its own initiative." He waved his arms, and the holographic image changed, showing the body of an agent lying on the ground. Standing next to the corpse was a female zombie with short chestnut hair and a pair of transparent wings spread out behind her. After everyone saw it clearly, they all identified the zombie's identity, the Wasp. The Wasp chewed the meat in her mouth and raised her head while shouting angrily, "I've had enough. You're allowed to bite but not eat. Why don't you turn yourself into the size of an ant and fly thousands of meters high to grab a plane, Pim?" After swallowing the piece of meat, the corners of her mouth were covered with blood and she licked her lips with her tongue. Her eyes were wild, full of desire and ecstasy for flesh. "First eat 10 to fill your stomach, and then talk about the plan," she roared. Her transparent wings flapped slightly, and she was about to rush out of the room. Just as the Wasp was about to rush out of the room, a very powerful red laser flashed from the bathroom door and hit her directly against the wall. In an instant, the flames were blazing, and the Wasp's body burned instantly under the high temperature and turned into ashes, leaving only a scorched black mark. Immediately afterwards, a man touching the corners of his eyes slowly walked in. He was wearing an X-Men battlesuit, and the unique red eye patch revealed his identity, Cyclops. The thin man, who was almost 2 meters tall, looked at the messy bathroom and sighed helplessly, pressing his headset. Fury, where is the other toilet closest to me? Wait, I don't understand. Doctor Strange suddenly asked. Since the source of infection has been eliminated, these 10 minutes should be enough for you to eliminate the remaining infected people. Why are there zombies in the medical room? Fury listened quietly to Doctor Strange's words without saying a word. But the holographic projection changed again, now showing the deck image of the aerospace aircraft carrier. This is a real-time image. The infection inside the aerospace carrier just now is probably just a smoke bomb they used to disrupt our sight. In the projection, 2 clouds of blue and red smoke appeared and disappeared on the deck. Whenever smoke appears, they are accompanied by the appearance of a zombie hero. And just on the edge of the aerospace aircraft carrier, angels who were infected into zombies suddenly appeared. His wings were rotten, exuding a foul odor, and his body was covered with black rotten flesh and blood. He was carrying the infected American colonel in his left hand, and the infected Luke Cage in his right hand. He flicked his hands, and the 2 zombies hit the deck steadily, and then swooped down again, obviously to meet other flightless zombies. There are definitely not a few zombies who do what he does. Falcon, Ms. Marvel and others are constantly flying up with various zombie heroes. There were more and more zombies on the deck. They kept emerging in various ways, forming a terrifying tide. Hundreds of soldiers rushed out from all over and picked up heavy firepower weapons to suppress the onslaught of these zombies. The firepower of machine guns formed a dense storm of bullets in the air, and the harsh gunshots and rain of bullets were intertwined. The soldiers held the handles of their guns tightly, stabilized the muzzles, stood fearlessly in front of the zombie wave, and fired with all their strength. The flamethrower spit out scorching flames, burning a pile of zombies into scorched earth. The burning flames formed barriers, temporarily blocking the zombies' advance. Fire, fire, knock them down. Put them down. A squad leader held the gun tightly and pulled the trigger at the zombies without flinching, but a shield swept past as fast as lightning. He passed by and cut off him and several surrounding soldiers. The soldiers didn't have time to react. Their bodies split into 2 instantly, and their screams even drowned out the friendly gunfire for a moment. With only his upper body left, the squad leader struggled hard, his hands painfully grabbing at the fallen firearm on the ground. He used his last bit of strength to stretch out his trembling arms, and his fingertips touched the weapon not far from him. Every inch of movement caused him to feel excruciating pain. Whoosh! Several arrows flew suddenly, and the arrow tips accurately penetrated the heads of the soldiers, completely ending their lives. PSSSSSSSSSS's, Colonel's shield is not clean. If you become zombies too, it will taste terrible. Hawkeye winked at the motionless corpse on the ground, took out another arrow, put it on his bow and shot it. Are we just going to watch those people die? Is this what a hero should do? Wolverine angrily popped out his shining steel claws. The cold light of the steel claws flashed, and his voice was filled with anger and unwillingness. He was unwilling to stand idly by or sit idly by. No, if you go, I'm afraid it will only have the opposite effect. Today is different from the past. Your style of injuring the enemy 800 and losing 2000 to yourself will only make you die faster, Logan. Fury whispered. In addition, all Quinjets that can take off directly are on the deck. If we want to get on the plane, we have to pass through those zombies. Hearing these words, Logan suddenly felt discouraged. He withdrew his steel claws, with a hint of helplessness in his eyes. Then we just wait here to die. Why don't we do some exercise to make our flesh stronger? No, never. Fury's eyes flashed. Although time is tight and I cannot develop an antidote to the virus, I still found a few strong people who can compete with the zombie virus. Each of them has something special. Each has unique skills, and their fighting spirit and patience are even more astonishing. The secret weapon will give those zombies an unexpected surprise. Chapter 41. The American colonel knelt down and picked up the shield, licking the blood on the shield with his tongue, squinting his eyes comfortably and shivering. Hank was really smart. He asked his wife to go to the ship to make some noise and let her take a few bites first so that the remaining zombies could have a chance to touch the aerospace aircraft carrier. Alas, even Janet hasn't come out yet. She is probably dead. It's a pity. Let's take a few more bites for her to comfort her spirit in heaven. Grandson, look towards your father's side. Suddenly, a rough roar came from a distance, making the sides of the ship tremble. The American colonel was startled. He didn't know why and turned his head to look in the direction of the sound. The guy who was sliding his tongue on the shield looked back and saw a black-haired red giant nearly 3 meters tall roaring towards him. The body is huge and the muscles are stretched like a moving mountain. The giant's footsteps shook the deck, as if the ground could not bear his power. Ah, the American colonel tilted his head. In his memory, the zombie virus would make other people fear him and try to keep a distance. Why wasn't this guy in front of him afraid and instead rushed towards him? However, he didn't spend too much time thinking about this problem. He twisted his stiff mouth and jumped up to attack the Red Hulk. Whether he ate the Red Hulk or spread the virus by biting him, it was a great event. When the American colonel pounced on Red Hulk roared and his body expanded even larger. He shouted angrily, "Get out!" With a loud noise, Red Hulk used his huge palm to whip away the American colonel. The huge force caused the American colonel's body to fly out like a cannonball, and finally hit the wall of the cabin, forming a huge crater. The walls collapsed under the impact of the American colonel, sending dust flying everywhere. The American colonel's body sank deeply into the pit, and blood flowed from his body, but he did not stop moving immediately. Although the augmented soldier who was infected into a zombie was hit hard by the Red Hulk, he still got up wriggling with his broken body, staring at the Red Hulk with hungry eyes, and then grinned. Bang! In an instant, a ball of blue smoke quickly condensed behind Red Hulk. In the smoke, Nightcrawler, who was infected into a zombie, suddenly appeared and used his teleportation ability to instantly move to Red Hulk's back. Nightcrawler's sharp tail stabbed into Red Hulk's back mercilessly, and red blood spurted out. The spikes dug deeply into Red Hulk's flesh, causing him to burst into intense pain and roar. "Get down here!" Red Hulk struggled, trying to shake off Nightcrawler. His body was shaking violently, but Nightcrawler seized the opportunity, firmly grasped Red Hulk's back, and bit him again. At this critical moment, an iron chain burning with black-red flames was thrown out of the air. The iron chain hit Nightwalker's body accurately and quickly tied him tightly. Nightwalker let out a scream and tried to use his teleportation ability to escape from the restraints. How is this possible? However, to his surprise, his ability seemed to have lost its effect, and he could only briefly appear in place as a faint puff of smoke. Black-red flames burned from the iron chains, making a crackling sound. The chains became tighter and tighter, and Nightwalker felt suffocated and powerless. He struggled but could not break free. The Ghost Rider slowly walked out of the shadows, the flames on his burning skull shining with black and red light, like a messenger from hell. Oh wait, it seems he is. Ghost Rider stretched out his arms fiercely, grabbing Nightcrawler's head tightly with his 5 fingers like iron pliers. His strength was as ruthless as steel. Nightwalker's body was trembling, his eyes were white, full of fear and powerlessness. Etc. A black-red anger spurted out from the skull, sweeping out like a violent wind and instantly swallowing Nightwalker's head, wrapping his head in it. Nightwalker let out a desperate scream, but was suddenly stopped amidst the devouring sound of the flames. Stop. Ghost Rider let go of his hand indifferently, and Nightcrawler's ashes flew away in the wind, blown into countless tiny fragments. Then, the flaming skull looked at Red Hulk who was holding his back. "General Ross, you are infected." "That's right, but as long as I'm angry enough, I can." Red Hulk clenched his fist tightly, his whole body glowed with dazzling red light, and his yellow eyes were filled with angry light, as if 2 flames were burning. Anger made Red Hulk's strength continue to grow. He felt the raging rage boiling inside his body, as if it was about to tear the whole world into pieces. As the fire of Red Hulk's anger rose, the metal deck around him began to hiss, sound. The temperature rose sharply and the metal began to melt, flowing like lava, his rage turning the metal into a hot liquid that swallowed up everything around it. The burning skull took 2 steps back silently. He was not afraid of the temperature, but the molten metal was about to flow onto his feet. Melt them down. The best thing to do if you get sick is to run a fever, especially if you can heat yourself to gamma-ray temperatures. As he said that, Red Hulk laughed and patted his back. The wound there had completely healed, and there was no trace of any injury at all. "Okay, Steve, where is this little fool?" Looking back, He realized that the American colonel who had just been lying there watching the show had run away without knowing it. Hurry up and release Fury's potted plant. You shouldn't have to do this a few times. Our mission is to clear the way for the large army. Ghost Rider retracted his chain and came to Red Hulk and patted him. What he said is correct. Although Red Hulk can burn the zombie virus to death by continuously raising his body temperature, his physical strength is always limited and it is impossible to fight like this for a whole day. As for the Ghost Rider, in the state of the spirit of vengeance, he is not considered a living thing at all. There is no risk of being infected, and it is also impossible to fight for a whole day. Become. Red Hulk clenched his fist into a fist and jumped up suddenly. The ground shook and air waves swept around. He smashed into a container 100 meters away at an incredible speed and fell like a meteorite. The metal shell collapsed instantly under his impact, and the fragments flew everywhere. A large mass of fresh soil was violently torn out, exuding a moist smell, and fine soil particles scattered into the air. At the same time, the roots of small plants are exposed as the soil is turned, eager for the nourishment of sunlight and moisture. Get up, buddy, it's time for you to take action. Red Hulk pushed the ball of soil with his feet. The lump of soil became quiet for a moment, as if some kind of power was brewing inside it. Then, suddenly, it began to tumble violently, sending crumbling clods of earth flying everywhere. The originally tiny plant roots in the soil began to grow rapidly, extending into long vines. At that moment, the roots quickly condensed into something that looked like a humanoid. The roots emerging from the soil twisted and quickly transformed into strong limbs and a huge body. The plant's root system completely transforms within seconds, forming a tall, plant-like creature. Is there really no solution to the zombie virus? I'm afraid not necessarily. There are superhuman beings in this world who can resist this kind of infection. Iceman, who completely transformed himself into another form, Ghost Rider, and humanoids who are not human at all, Midnight Werewolf, are simply robots like Vision. But the problem is that they may be able to avoid being infected, but the combat effectiveness of the zombie heroes is not vegetarian. What's the point of losing 2 parts of your body just to get a bite of meat? People like Deadhead and the Wasp in the comics who only have 1 head left have to shake their heads with their masseter muscles to let themselves take another bite of delicious meat. In the face of tens of thousands of super-powered zombies, a dozen or 20 superheroes who can avoid infection cannot save the world, or even themselves. The humanoid figure slowly stood up from the soil, its figure tall and majestic. His body is made of vines, and his muscle lines highlight his powerful strength. Red Hulk's eyes met the humanoid, and a strange aura intertwined between the two. Red Hulk stared at the humanoid, noticing the red glow in his eyes. In those red eyes, Red Hulk felt an unusual power, a desire to wait for his command. Go over there and you are responsible for clearing the way to the east. The tall red giant roared angrily. He grabbed several surrounding containers with his strong hands, lifted them up effortlessly, and then threw them fiercely in the direction of the zombie pile in the distance. The containers shattered with a bang, and the inside mud was flying everywhere. Broken containers were scattered on the ground, with dirt pouring out of them like waves. Then, he grabbed the humanoid vine arm. The humanoid was lifted effortlessly by Red Hulk, just like lifting a handful of dirt. Red Hulk vigorously shook his arm and threw the humanoid towards the distant mound. The humanoid whizzed through the air like a green lightning bolt. The earth splashed everywhere, and for a while the dust filled the air, with ripples of mud surging on the mound. The humanoid fell on the mound, and his body blended perfectly into the soil, as if he had become part of the earth. He did not suffer any harm. He stood up from the mound, stared in the direction of Red Hulk, and shook slightly. The lower tentacles looked like eyebrows. The beast that had been infected into a zombie was greedily stuffing a piece of meat into its mouth, making crunching sounds, and the dull blue hair on its ears was trembling. The beast had not eaten since he ate Xavier a few hours ago, but the American colonel suddenly sent someone to find him and said that there was an opportunity to eat at the buffet and asked him if he could join. Do you still need to ask? For sure, there are not many people alive in New York City now. If you want to eat meat, you have to run out of the state, but his short blue-haired legs can't outrun those speedsters. Therefore, the beast responded on the spot, and the colonel also fulfilled his promise. The aerospace aircraft carrier indeed has countless fresh meat for everyone to enjoy. Creak. Suddenly, there was a faint sound in his ears, and he turned around suddenly, only to see a tall vine monster with red eyes standing behind him. Before Professor McCoy could use his 3 doctorates and 18 honorary professorships to think carefully about what this thing in front of him was. Those vines seemed to be alive, quickly entangled in the beast's flesh, forming a twisted and terrifying bondage. The vines were covered with spikes and barbs that clawed into the flesh, making it impossible for the beast to break free, holding him firmly like shackles. "Wait a minute, I know who you are the monster in the swamp, and you are the humanoid." The beast screamed, and he completely remembered that he must not feel fear under the touch of a humanoid, otherwise he would be burned to ashes by its fear touch. But at this time, he fell into a self-circulating thinking trap, like, don't think about an elephant. Even though he knew he should stay calm, the more he learned about humanoids, the more terrified he became. I can no longer see the sun, can no longer let my thoughts wander endlessly in my brain, and can no longer eat a delicious bite of meat. Countless worries and anxieties circulated in his rotting and stinking brain. Every thought was like a sharp hook, piercing deeply into his heart, and finally turned into fear. As the beast's fear reaches its peak, flames slowly rise from his body. At first, there were only faint sparks flickering around him, like stars in the dark, almost imperceptible. However, those little sparks gradually merged. Finally, in an instant, the flames suddenly expanded like an exploding star. It instantly filled the space around the beast, enveloping him entirely. The blazing flame burned extremely violently, releasing a dazzling light. In his final moments, he let out a shrill cry, "I'm sorry, Xavier." His voice gradually dissipated in the flames, leaving only embers and black smoke floating in the air. The humanoid turned around slightly and scanned the surrounding zombies. There was no emotion in its red eyes. Step by step, the humanoid walked toward the other zombies, each step steady and powerful. As he moved forward, the residue of the soil was scattered, and his vines stretched out like devil's tentacles, grabbing the approaching zombies and igniting them mercilessly. The zombies let out shrill screams, their bodies burned in the flames, and quickly turned into ashes. "Go over there. Those are the people sent by the director." A large group of soldiers shouted and rushed towards the humanoid. They had just received Fury's order in the communication channel, asking them to launch Quinjet fighters under the leadership of these heroes and begin to evacuate. The humanoid sensed the approach of the soldiers, and his red eyes flashed with ferocious light. He rushed forward without hesitation, and the vines grew rapidly, condensing into a hard fist and punching away the angel who was rushing towards him. Red Hulk clenched his fist and crushed a zombie's head with huge force, causing blood and bone fragments to scatter everywhere. Boom! There was a loud noise from behind, as if an extremely large and heavy object slammed into the open space behind him. The ground shook violently, and debris flew everywhere, hitting his broad back. What kind of gadgets? The red giant cursed and turned around, his pupils contracting instantly when he saw the person coming. The visitor was wearing solid red armor and a wide helmet, with only his mouth and eyes exposed, like a red iron pot upside down on his face. Even in front of Red Hulk, who was nearly 3 meters tall, the figure also appears to be unusually large. "I have only fought with Banner before, not with a perverted Hulk like you." He wheezed and wheezed, making a creepy sound, but this wheezing was not because of exhaustion, but because of hunger. His mouth opened, revealing sharp teeth, and blood flowed out of the bloody mouth from time to time, forming bright red liquid texture. That certainly wouldn't be the blood of a red tank. Red Tank's skin had rotted and turned black, and the dark red blood slowly solidified on his body surface, forming disgusting blood clots. His body exuded the stench of rotting corpses, which was unbearable. "But compared to those, your meat looks chewy." After saying this, Red Tank punched Red Hulk with a fierce momentum and amazing power. "Hulk, smash it." Red Hulk did not retreat but advanced. He also clenched his fists. The surging blood vessels were clearly visible on his arms, winding like rivers. The fists of the two collided, causing a deafening bang. The powerful impact visible to the naked eye spread to all directions, forming a terrifying shock wave. The shock wave brought up huge air waves, and the metal plates on the deck were instantly shattered, and the fragments scattered like rain. Large air waves carried debris and sparks and spread around the space aircraft carrier. The running soldiers were violently pushed to the ground by the shock wave, with horrified expressions frozen on their faces. The structure of the aerospace aircraft carrier began to tremble, under tremendous pressure, and seemed to be shattered at any time. The remaining zombies also noticed the battlefield here, and their attention was gradually diverted. In the explosion of the shock wave, Red Hulk and Red Tank paused, and then retracted their fists. Red Hulk's muscles were brimming, and he tried his best to resist the impact of the shock wave with his strong body. But the Red Tank was as steady as a mountain, only taking half a step back. The red armor surface shimmered slightly, as if it was strong enough to withstand everything. His body withstood the force brought by the shock wave, but always remained stable without any wavering. One side is a monster giant created by gamma rays, and the other side is a zombie with energy injected into the back of the butt by the dimensional devil. The soldiers witnessed this fierce battle and tried their best to aim their weapons at the red tanks in an attempt to interfere in the battle. Bullets and energy beams kept flying, but the red tank's armor was nearly invulnerable, and it withstood all attacks, remaining as solid as a rock. A soldier watched the pair of monsters pounce on each other again and swallowed. How about we leave first? General Ross doesn't seem to need our help. I agree. That's right. General Ross is invincible in the world. Then they turned and ran. In the chaos and smoke, a floor suddenly rose, revealing a door. Then the door opened, and a large group of people poured out. It was Fury and his party. As soon as they came out, they hurriedly ran towards the Quinjet and watched the fierce duel between Red Hulk and Red Tank. Fury shouted loudly, "Evacuate quickly, Red Hulk and the others can withstand it." They scurried across the battlefield, dodging flying debris and blast waves. Fury's expression was solemn, and there was a hint of anxiety in his eyes. This battle was far beyond their capabilities. Among the evacuation team, the most eye-catching person was a man lying on a stretcher. His body was tightly fixed and surrounded by 4 or 5 hanging bottles. Through the infusion tube, medicine was continuously injected into his body. The thin patient's face was pale, beads of sweat oozed from his forehead, and his eyelids twitched slightly, as if there was some strong reaction deep in his consciousness. Occasionally, his eyes flashed with a green light. Medical staff surrounded him closely and monitored his condition closely. Their expressions were serious and focused, trying to keep his vital signs stable. The patient's status was obviously extraordinary and his body required special care. In a corner of the tarmac, Ghost Rider rode a motorcycle he got from nowhere, quickly circling the Quinjet like a black whirlwind, the chain dancing skillfully in his hands. Whenever he found a zombie approaching, the chain would be whipped out like a flexible whip. The lighter ones were beaten to pieces and fell to the ground, while the more serious ones were simply whipped away or burned into a ball of ashes. The power confrontation between Red Hulk and Red Tank continued to escalate. Their fists collided fiercely. Each collision caused huge damage. The aftermath of the fight spread like a hurricane sweeping across the deck of an aerospace aircraft carrier. The steel and metal structures on the deck were under tremendous pressure and made a grinding sound, as if shouting out pain. The sound of twisted metal echoed across the battlefield like a wailing symphony. The structure of the aerospace carrier was completely overturned, the solid steel bars were squeezed and bent, and debris flew everywhere. Red Tank waved his fists angrily and roared at Red Hulk, "Ross, you should give up. I just need to take a small bite on you, and then you can share this feast with us." Red Hulk's black hair danced wildly in the fierce battle, and was messy by the strong wind. They are like burning flames, swaying and releasing a wild aura with every powerful punch of the Red Hulk. However, Red Hulk's yellow eyes look extremely cunning. Unlike his son-in-law Banner, General Ross was able to maintain complete sanity after the transformation, and even became smarter because he got rid of his old body. He smiled, with a hint of teasing in his eyes, and replied, "Okay." Red Hulk's response made Red Tank instantly stop punching. He blinked in confusion and asked in disbelief, "Are you serious? You really want me to bite you?" Ross sneered, "Retarded, Ted, let me catch him." In an instant, the ground shook violently, a large area of land cracked, and thick vines spread out from the ground and quickly wrapped around the Red Tank's body. These vines may seem ordinary, but they contain extremely powerful power. They quickly wrap around like a python, tightly restraining the Red Tank and lifting it into the air. "Who the hell do you think you are? I'm a Red Tank, and no one can stop the Red Tank." The Red Tank roared, his muscles all tense, trying to break free from the humanoid vines wrapped around his body. He twisted his body with all his strength, and every struggle he made was accompanied by tremendous force. The vines were torn apart by his power, and the cracks spread, but the humanoid was undeterred and quickly released more vines in an attempt to restrain the red tank again. However, the red tanks were destroyed far faster than the humanoids could be created. He waved his arms vigorously, and each wave brought with it the sound of howling wind. The vines shattered into pieces under his power, as if torn into thin threads by an invisible force. Of course I know who you are, Marco. Red Hulk smiled ferociously and slowly moved his right arm. His fingers were clenched into a fist, the knuckles were bulging and the skin became tight. I also know that you only weigh 862 kilograms and that I can blow up a mountain with one punch. He quickly waved his huge fist, aimed at the red tank that was lifted in the air, and punched it out. The red tank's body was instantly knocked away, and the humanoid vines on his body were also destroyed by the power of the Red Hulk, flying in all directions. Its huge body drew a red arc in the air and quickly broke away from the deck of the aerospace aircraft carrier, causing strong airflow and explosions. It flew out like a meteor and disappeared into the sky. Fury stood on the Quinjet, wearing a black suit and looking firmly into the distance. The cabin door was wide open, and the biting wind roared in, ruffling his hair. He stood motionless by the porthole, looking out through the glass. In his sight, the Quinjet fighters had taken off, forming a spectacular flight formation. Their engines roared, and the jet flames at their tails burned, leaving bright trails across the sky. He gently pressed the headset. "We are ready to evacuate, General Ross, where are you?" "Here we come. Make some room for us." Just hearing a shout from outside the cabin, Red Hulk jumped into the cabin of the Quinjet, carrying the Ghost Rider who turned into an ordinary person on his shoulders. The humanoid body hung on his legs, and the red giant his body seemed to fill the cabin. "You're overweight. It does take up a bit too much space, huh?" Red Hulk groaned. His originally tall and mighty figure gradually became smaller, his muscles receded, and his abundant sense of strength disappeared. His skin became saggy, wrinkles appeared on his forehead, and his hair turned from black to gray. If the old man in front of him wasn't still wearing those elastic tights, no one would associate him with the world-destroying Red Hulk. The Quinjet took off slowly, and the hatch began to close. Fury stared closely at the aerospace carrier, his eyes falling on the dozens of automatic cannons rising from the aerospace carrier. These cannons deployed quickly, flashing with cold metallic light. Their barrels were spinning, firing at full blast. As the shooting began, bullets rained down, forming a dense barrage. Each bullet carries the power of death, whizzing through the air, finding the target, and knocking down the zombies one by one. But it was only knocked down. The zombies were attracted by the firepower of the machine guns and reunited towards the center of the deck. The huge aerospace aircraft carrier also began to gradually collapse and explode, with flames and debris from the explosion flying everywhere. Its structure began to collapse. The huge explosion shock wave caused the steel of the ship's hull to twist and deform, and the sound of cracking filled the entire space. Flames and thick smoke spurted out from the cracks in the aerospace carrier, shrouding it in a horrific scene. The man with only one eye stood silently at the hatch, watching the torn-apart space aircraft carrier disappear into the last crack of the hatch, silent. "Are you sad?" Hill came over and stood next to Fury. Fury took a deep breath, then turned to look at Hill. He wiped the corners of his eyes and lowered his head with a smile, "As sad as if my wife died. Maybe this is what people often call a midlife crisis." Hill silently reached out and patted Fury on the shoulder. She understood what all this meant to him. The space carrier was once a symbol of their faith and hope. The Skrull invasion did not destroy it, nor did the Kree. Neither did the Dark Phoenix. Until today. "Okay, let's call our Mr. Bayi. I hope he has reached an agreement with Dr. Doom." Fury readjusted his emotions and became the calm agent leader again. "Hello. Well, it's me. Has I crashed? How many of you are still alive over there?" Bayi sat at the dining table, holding a phone on his shoulder and stirring a cup of coffee with a spoon. The spoon made a slight stirring sound in the cup. "So much, I thought. No, it's nothing. You can come over at any time. Doom and I have already made an agreement. He will let you in." Putting the phone gently on the table, he raised his hand to pick up the white porcelain cup. The aroma of coffee filled the air around him, and he took a sip. As the taste of coffee spreads on the tip of his tongue, Bayi's expression gradually relaxed. He felt a warmth welling up from his heart. The coffee brought him not only the enjoyment of taste, but also a moment of tranquility and comfort. Thinking about it carefully, since arriving in the 2149 universe, I have been running on the road with little time to breathe. At this time, the overall situation has been decided, and it's finally time to take a good rest. Doom temporarily arranged rooms for several people. This castle is very big. Doom has already reached an agreement. The Lord of Latveria just took Susan to the rooftop to get some fresh air and relax. I don't know if he wants to follow Ama's move. The number of people Fury brought out alive was a bit beyond imagination. A dozen quinjets contained at least hundreds of people. But of course this is not a bad thing. The more people who can survive, the better. He exhaled comfortably, closed his eyes, and quietly enjoyed the moment of peace. Hello. Just as Bayi was resting with his eyes closed, a sound suddenly woke him up and broke the peaceful atmosphere. He opened his eyes helplessly and found that the invisible woman Susan was coming over. Didn't she go to the terrace with Dr. Doom to get some fresh air? Susan saw Bayi open her eyes and said eagerly, "Ah, Bayi, right. Were you talking to Fury just now? My brother Johnny. He's fine at all. He's on his way here with Fury." After pinching the root of his nose, he looked at Susan, who was taking a deep breath and obviously relieved, and asked, "Didn't you and Doom go up for some fresh air just now?" Susan quickly replied, "Yes, I just wanted to come over to tell you that there seemed to be zombies in Castle Doom. I just happened to hear you and Fury talking on the phone. I walked around on the terrace for a while, and when I went back to the castle to go to the toilet, I suddenly saw a line of blood on the ground." Bayi frowned. "Zombie. Bloodstains. It shouldn't be. Doom wouldn't let a few zombies get in because of a loophole in the defense, right? Wait, the invisible woman is right, there is indeed a zombie in this castle." He slapped his head, threw down the porcelain cup, stood up and said, "Go find Doom." Hearing this, Susan blinked. "Shouldn't we kill that zombie first? There is some kind of illusion inside the castle, which causes the positions of various rooms to constantly change in appearance. The blood stains you just saw can be thousands of miles away from your reality. Only Doom knows where that zombie is. Dumb knows. But why? No, is he already infected?" Susan covered her mouth in disbelief. Could it be that she had just been staying with a zombie? Bayi shook his head and walked out of the room. "It's not that serious. It's just that our castle master may be too confident in the cage he has set." "Cage? What do you mean?" The invisible woman quickly followed Bayi and knocked on the doors of several other people around her with her telekinesis. "Ah, nothing." Bayi turned around and glanced at the sleepy stone man, as well as Thor and the Punisher, who were eager to fight. These two people had a very sensitive sense of smell, and they knew there was a fight when they saw Susan's anxious look. Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch were not here. They said they were going to see how the civilians in Latveria were doing. Doom said they had locked these people in the basement. It was our dear Doom who imprisoned the witch Amora. That alone is nothing, but Amora has been infected and turned into a zombie. But the second point actually doesn't matter. Maybe Doom has a special taste. We should respect and bless him, but now there may be a fool who wants to release that zombie. Dumb, come out. Bayi led the way, followed by Susan, Thor and the Punisher. The stone man walked at the back and yawned. As he walked, Bayi silently recalled the information about the witch Amora in his mind. The charming witch is an Asgardian, and her physical fitness is 3 times that of the average human. Apart from the fighting skills and some magic that Marvel people have, her best thing is to confuse the opposite gender. Of course, these problems are not the main ones. I know the virtues of the charming witch very well. If I really encounter the invisible woman, I can just let her head explode. Doom, as a true straight man of steel, will not fall for those little tricks. That's Ash Williams. He was just thrown far away on the streets of New York before, without killing him. Not to mention that at a certain point in time, there were 2 Ashes in New York City, which doubled his chances of survival. If other superheroes did not change their existing destinies due to the butterfly effect they brought, would Ash also encounter Zonyin and use her flying machine to come to Latveria like in the original plot? Of course Dr. Doom would not easily let people of unknown origin enter Doom Castle, but at the same time Doom was also a gentleman. If Zan Yin insisted on letting Ash in, then Doom would not bother to stop him. After arriving there, the lustful Ash released Amora without any awareness of being a guest. He himself was fine, but he killed Zan Yin who wanted to save him. But then again, why would Doom want to learn English if he stayed with Amora? Bang! A cloud of green mist exploded in front of everyone, and then Dr. Doom's iconic iron face appeared in it. As the green mist dissipated, it gradually transformed into his figure. Why are you looking for Doom, so anxious and disrespectful? Before Bayi could say anything, Susan stepped forward and shouted, "You locked up Amora." The man in iron mask under the hood was silent for half a second, and then he explained, "It's not what you think, Sue, please listen to my explanation." "Then what do you think I think?" I said stop. Seeing that things were going in a strange direction, Bayi quickly pulled the excited invisible woman behind him and signaled the stone man to keep an eye on her. He turned around after the stone man held her down. "We already know that Amora is imprisoned by you." HMPH. Doom sneered, "What, you guys don't forget to be heroes even after the end of the world? Are you so passionate that you even want to save a villain? In fact, you are also a bad person," Bayi secretly cursed, and then added, "and we also know that she has been infected." What? As soon as these words came out, Doomu was immediately shocked. He was the only one in Fort Doom who knew this secret. How did this group of people who had only been here for a while know about it? This child cannot be kept. This child has a way to die. This child's eyelids are beating slightly behind the mask, and his brain is running rapidly. Did you take in Zan Yin and one of her accompanying men before we came? This time, Doom was completely speechless and stood there. Seeing that Doom was temporarily frightened, Bayi took a deep breath and continued, "I forgot to tell you before, but I will tell you now. In fact, I am a prophet. It was precisely because of this that Fury was like this before. Trust me and send me to consult with you." Dr. Doom didn't say anything, and looked at Bayi intently. After a long time, he said, "In other words, you have not been completely honest with Doom before." His cloak was blown and rustled by a sudden gust of wind. How could there be wind in this castle? Doom just got angry again. As the monarch of Latveria, what he hates most in his life is others lying to him and disrespecting him. Most of the time, the two can be interchanged or appear at the same time. "Dear Lord of Latveria, I have no intention of offending you at all." Bayi looked at Doomu who suppressed his anger calmly. "On the contrary, I came to remind you out of respect, because there is the little thief is about to free your prisoner." You mean the coward who follows Zan Yin? Exactly. Dr. Doom was silent for a moment, turned to face the depths of the corridor, and stepped forward firmly. Bayi followed without hesitation. He believed that Dr. Doom had already made a judgment. The others looked at each other, then followed suit. Although they didn't understand Dr. Destruction's intentions, they firmly believed in Bayi's choice. Bayi asked casually, "Why don't you have surveillance here? Can't you just see where Ash is?" Dr. Doom thought for a moment, and then replied, "All the electricity is used to charge the portal, including the energy in the spell circuit. I could hear you talking before because it left a mark here." Doom also stayed in Amora, but there was no movement at this time. Either what you said is false, or that person hasn't gotten there yet. Bayi pretended to be surprised and said, "You mean you are spying on us?" This time Doom said nothing, just moved on, neither denying nor admitting. The group of people turned around and walked through a complicated corridor, and finally came to a long corridor. At the end of this corridor are several cages composed of pink energy beams from top to bottom. There seems to be a blonde figure shaking inside the cage. Everyone stopped and stared at the blonde figure in the cage. The figure seemed to be struggling, but was trapped in a cage, unable to escape. The pink energy beam shines with mysterious light, giving people a powerful feeling. At the same time, at the end of the corridor outside the cage, there was a figure whose back looked quite similar to Dr. Doom. But they only looked similar at first glance. The man was a head shorter than Doom, and he was stooped. He didn't look like the Lord of Latveria. Doom stared at the back, his expression solemn and indifferent. He slowly raised a palm, and blue light flashed and sizzled in his palm. This is not magic, but a palm cannon similar to Iron Man. It is cheap and does good damage. It is simply a must-have product for home travel in the Marvel Universe. Bayi cleared his throat, and his voice echoed in the corridor. Ash Williams, are you looking for the Book of Death? When the figure from behind heard this, he immediately turned around. Ah. Who are you? However, in the next second, a blue energy beam shot quickly, magnified in his eyes instantly, and hit him and the blonde figure behind him on the head. A scorching energy enveloped them, followed by scorching flames. The back and the head of the blonde figure were burned to ashes almost instantly, leaving only a trace of burning. Bayi clapped and laughed, and he slowly approached the place where the ashes were. What a joy, what a joy. Congratulations to Dr. Destruction for getting rid of one, no, two serious worries. Leave aside the charming witch for now. Can this sneaky guy who steals my clothes be considered a big worry? Doom crossed his arms and sneered. It's a big worry to make people feel unhappy. Bayi said absently, and took a closer look. The heads of the charming witch and Ash had completely turned into a pile of ashes, and they were no longer dead. But half-comic male protagonists like Ash usually don't die so tragically. When the Ash of this universe dies, another one might pop up somewhere in the Evil Dead universe. This is exactly the reason why two Ash Williams appeared in New York City at the same time as mentioned before. Just as Bayi watched Ash turn into ashes, someone suddenly rushed out from behind everyone and screamed in shock, "What have you done? You killed him." The visitor's blonde hair was spread over his shoulders, shimmering, and he was wearing a tight-fitting white tights and a blue mask on his face that looked like a pleasure prince. Dr. Doom turned around, looked at the offended Schwenian in front of him and said indifferently, "The clown you brought is not only about to release Doom's prisoners, but he is also blatantly pretending to be Doom. This is undoubtedly a great disrespect and disrespect, insult. Death is the punishment he deserves. Do you have any objection?" Schwenian, who was turning green and white at first, was about to say something when Susan quickly stepped forward to pull her aside, stretched out her hands and gently put them on her shoulders to comfort the impulsive little girl. Zan Yin is a mutant who can turn her beautiful singing voice into bright light and release it. Gone. If Doom, a small-time character like this, wanted to kill him, it would be no more difficult than squeezing a little bug to death. The Invisible Woman's move was exactly to help her. Although Doom is a gentleman and very friendly to ladies, he will never be soft-hearted when it is time to take action. Maybe he will not kill Zan Yin directly, but he can be locked up or driven out of Fort Dome easily. Although the second option seems more cruel than killing directly. HMPH, success is not enough. Fury and the others have arrived at Latveria, let's go. Seeing Zan Yin lowering her head and not daring to say anything more, Doomu snorted coldly, turned around and led everyone outside. At this time, Fury was standing by the window of the Quinjet, looking through the glass at Fort Doom, which was getting closer and closer, calmly. The tower in Latveria indicated that we can land. Do we need to send a few fighter planes to land first to check the situation? Hill walked to Fury and asked softly. No need, Dr. Doom won't play tricks on this kind of thing. If he wants to harm us, there's no need to wait until he lands. Also, are your things ready? At this, Hill nodded, took a suitcase from the agent beside him, and handed it to the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. The box has a simple and sturdy appearance, made of high-quality black leather, with a smooth surface without any patterns, except for a small metal S.H.I.E.L.D. logo in the center. After taking the box, Fury looked down. There was a Quinjet parked on the wide airport. He recognized it at a glance as the one Bayi and others were riding in before. As his Quinjet slowly descended, Fury felt his body sink. The hatch slowly opened, a bright light shone out, and strong winds roared in, making his coat rustle. People were coming and going on the tarmac, and someone was greeting their arrival. Welcome to Latveria. Feeling the strong wind brought by the fighter plane as it landed, Bayi raised the corners of his mouth and opened his arms towards Fury and his group who were stepping out of the fighter plane. There were more than a dozen Quinjet fighters landing slowly around them at the same time. Many people even hugged each other and cried after stepping out of the plane. The scene when the aerospace aircraft carrier crashed was too horrific, and many of them even fought with the zombies. They met each other and almost got eaten. The group of people who are getting off the plane now can be said to be the luckiest handful in the world. Not only did they escape the initial virus outbreak, but they also escaped the second crash of an aerospace aircraft carrier. Hearing this, Fury's mouth twitched, but he still went up to hug Bayi, and then teased, "We haven't seen each other for a few hours, and you have become a person from Latveria." "I didn't say it. It's all your own imagination." Bayi shrugged. Before the two of them finished speaking, the figure of Dr. Destruction suddenly appeared in front of them. The green cloak on his body was fluttering in the breeze. The iron mask covered his face and his expression could not be seen clearly. Doom first glanced at Johnny, Susan and the stone man in the distance. The three of them hugged each other happily. The Fantastic Three were their last support in this world. Later, the Lord of Latveria mocked the one-eyed dragon in front of him. "Where are the American colonels and other Avengers? I heard that they seem to be revenge on those civilians." Fury's face darkened when he heard this, and he turned around and said, "Mr. Bai, your new friend is not very friendly." Before Bayi could answer, he added, "Dumb, although they were infected and turned into zombies, it is not their fault, nor is it your reason to insult the heroes who have fought for this world." Hero. As soon as these two words came out, Dr. Doom immediately sneered, "Isn't Reed the boss of your Fantastic Four? Isn't he trying to turn himself into a zombie to complete some bullshit evolution? In my opinion, your Avenger is nothing. I, Doom, will eventually become the savior of mankind and the greatest hero in human history." Faker. Fury's teeth were clenching and veins were popping on his forehead. As a level 10 agent who had carried a gun in World War II and fought artillery in the Cold War and had gone through ups and downs, he rarely showed anger on his face. Okay, let's all calm down by saying a few words." Bayi reluctantly stepped forward to smooth things over. How could these two people be so busy bickering when the world was about to end, just like children? "Dr. Doom, you might as well show the tolerance and kindness of the Lord of Latveria. These people have just experienced a war and need to rest. I believe they will repay the favor and become a fighting force to protect Fort Dome." Quote. And Fury, "Let the past be bygones. The important thing is to take care of those who are still alive." After staring at Doom's iron face for a few seconds, Fury finally lowered his head and took a deep breath. Although he didn't want to admit defeat, Bayi was right. No matter how much you argue for it, when hungry zombies such as the former American colonel attack, they will never show mercy because of their old friendship. Those who are alive must continue to find ways to survive, no matter whether it is humiliating or not. Seeing that Fury seemed to have calmed down and Doom did not continue to tit for tat, Bayi nodded calmly. The most important thing for the enemy at the moment was to communicate unanimously. It's time to let go of the love-hate relationship between superheroes and supervillains in the past. No matter what, everyone is still human and should be on the same side. He turned around and planned to go back to the castle and rest for a while. At this time, Fury suddenly said, "Mr. Bai, please stay, S.H.I.E.L.D. has a gift for you." Bayi, who had not walked a few meters away, looked back at Fury, raised his eyebrows and asked curiously, "What gift?" Bayi sat in front of the desk and absent-mindedly pushed the half cup of coffee that had cooled to the corner of the table. He was obviously no longer interested in it. Instead, he gently placed a suitcase on the table. The already small table was immediately occupied by boxes. Its surface was covered with a layer of black leather, making it look low-key and calm. In the center, a shiny metal logo highlights the identity of S.H.I.E.L.D. This was the gift Fury had just said he would give him. He gently pressed the handle of the suitcase, and the front of the suitcase instantly lifted up, revealing a small screen. An input interface was displayed on the screen. Bayi was not surprised. He quickly entered a long list of passwords. With a click, the mechanical device inside the box began to operate, and the lid automatically popped open. The interior is almost filled with shockproof black elastic material. This material is soft to the touch but tough, and can effectively protect the safety of the items inside the box. And among the blackness, a small fixed bottle caught the eye. It was filled with a tube of light blue liquid. The texture of the liquid is like glass, but also like flowing water. It forms elegant curves and ripples when flowing in the container. Every drop of liquid appears to be extremely pure, as if it contains infinite energy. And this is indeed related to Infinity, which contains the Infinity Potion that Nick Fury once injected to extend his life, but it is not just that. It is also the only remaining tube of perfectly mixed super soldier serum in the world. It was distilled out of the factory 27 years ago. The formula was then lost according to the ancestral method in the Marvel Universe, and the scientist responsible for the research also died on the same day. After that, the potion was secretly kept by Fury in order to wait until the world's technology was advanced enough to replicate it one day. But obviously, this world will not have that day anymore. So Fury gave this tube of potion to himself in return for helping S.H.I.E.L.D., but according to him, this little thing was far from enough to repay Bayi's kindness. Anyway, I should thank you. After all, this thing is very precious. A smile broke out from the corner of Bayi's mouth. He carefully picked up the medicine tube and carefully observed the device on it. He found that there was a small button on the top of the medicine tube, which was obviously used to control air injection. He pointed the nozzle at his neck and lightly touched the button with his finger. The potion began to be injected slowly, accompanied by a faint sound of airflow. He could feel the moment the liquid entered his blood, accompanied by a slight warm touch. However, the warmth quickly turned into a fiery heat, as if a fire was burning in his veins. This fiery force rushed forward quickly along the blood circulation path, rushing towards his heart. Hiss! Bayi stood up from his chair like a bolt of lightning, and the various memories in his mind began to become clearer, as if rays of light flashed, taking him back to fragments of the past. The breakfast I had on Tuesday 4 weeks ago, the packet of Chinese that the instructor took out while sitting in the passenger seat at the driving school 2 years ago, putting aside these useless memories, more comic plots I had read also emerged. However, as the memory emerged, a severe brain swelling pain also followed, like a sharp knife piercing his head. He couldn't help but grab the edge of the table, trying to steady himself. But as the fiery energy spread within his body, his strength became extremely powerful. He unintentionally used too much force, and the edge of the table was crushed in his hands, and the broken wood shards scattered on the floor. Gradually, the sharp pain began to weaken, as if the memory and energy in my mind had found a balance. Bayi slowly opened his eyes, and a feeling of relief came to his heart. Call. He quickly touched the back of his head, then took a long breath, wiped the sweat from his forehead and said thankfully, "Fortunately, I didn't become like Reed from the Ultimate Universe, otherwise I would have to wear an oversized helmet every day when I go out." Mr. Fantastic in the 1610 universe, which is the Ultimate Universe, is how should I put it, a very strange person, both in appearance and in his heart. After being thrown into negative space by his teammates due to some minor friction, Reed miraculously came back to life, and then built a ball thing called the Dome, where he played the game of playing God for 1,000 years. In which his intelligence continues to increase. There are gains and losses. The price of becoming the smartest person in the world is that the size of his brain continues to expand as his intelligence increases, eventually making his head protrude twice as much backward, and there is no hair on it, is simply a complete freak. Fortunately, I didn't become like that, otherwise I would never see anyone in my life. Shaking his head, he put on the fitting clothes that the waiter at Fort Dome had already put in the closet, and Bayi opened the door and walked out. Castle Doom was now bustling with activity, and the halls and restaurants were crowded with people. The expressions on people's faces reveal a kind of joy in surviving the disaster. They are the passengers of the surviving space aircraft carrier. Among the crowd, waiters in black clothes shuttled back and forth, busy providing services to the guests. They hold trays filled with a variety of food and drinks to satisfy the guests' needs. The waiters listened skillfully to the customers' orders and served them with smiles on their faces. Even at the end of the world, Latveria well-trained waiters still maintain enough elegance, and can still maintain their composure when facing guests several times their size. Bayi scanned the crowd and saw many familiar faces, including Hill, Coulson, Tony, and Quicksilver. Tony was still wearing the golden red armor at this time, but the face armor was taken off. Considering the number of armors in this universe, he did not take off the armor because it was inconvenient to disassemble, and it was probably not because he wanted to show off. Bar. At this time, Tony excitedly spotted Bayi's figure, holding a glass of champagne. He chatted with the waiter for a few words, took a new glass of champagne, and then quickly walked towards Bayi and handed it out. "Hey, Bayi, you are coming to the banquet too," Tony said excitedly, his eyes shining with joy and his voice full of enthusiasm. "Banquet." Bayi raised his eyebrows and took the champagne. "Yeah," Doom said a few words at the airport about friends coming from far away, and then told us that he would take care of us. By the way, I have an idea. Ah, he hugged Bayi's shoulders, and the flames under his feet spurted out hot breath. With a burst of surprise, Tony and Bayi rose into the air together. Everyone present looked at each other in confusion, wondering what this slut was up to, and even dragged another person along with him. Tony pressed the loudspeaker on his armor and cleared his throat. Silence fell, and everyone waited quietly for his speech. Friends, I have something to say. Tony's voice echoed throughout the hall. I would like to introduce our savior, Bayi. A great prophet with the ability to predict the future. It is his prophecy that allows us to survive, instead of serving as dessert to those zombies, and gives us a future. After a brief silence, suddenly, everyone in the venue raised their wine glasses and shouted passionately, to Bayi. To the future. This shout was like a violent storm, and the sound echoed throughout the entire fort dome. Along with the joyful sound of the collision of wine glasses, it was like playing a passionate hymn. The two slowly landed back to the ground. Bayi looked at the people surrounding him, smiled, and drank the glass of champagne comfortably. In the spacious training room, Bayi stood on one side with his upper body bare, staring at the majestic Doom robot in front of him. The robot was huge, full of metal, and looked indestructible. Its green eyes shone with a cold light, as if challenging the White Knight. The next second, it raised its fist and rushed towards Bayi, who quickly twisted his body and whipped out his leg like a whip, hitting the robot's chest. The sharp sound of broken metal echoed in the air. Kacha! The robot's metal shell cracked under the impact of the huge force, as if a piece of fragile glass had been shattered. This sound was accompanied by the vibration of the robot's body, as if in response to the powerful blow it received. Metal fragments scattered in the air, shining with a cold light. The mechanical structure fell into chaos, as if it had suffered insurmountable damage. The repulsed robot stood staggeringly, with the sound of electric current emanating from the circuit. Its metal shell was damaged in the impact, but it still seemed to want to continue attacking Bayi. However, just as it was struggling to rush towards Bayi again, he had quickly circled behind it. Bayi grabbed the robot's shoulders and used a strangulation technique in martial arts. His arms tightened around the robot's neck like steel, preventing it from moving any further. The robot desperately grabbed Bayi's arm, trying to break free from his control. Bayi narrowed his eyes and felt the resistance of the robot. His muscles tensed up and he shouted loudly. He gathered all his strength and applied sudden pressure with his arms. The robot's neck made a terrible metal twisting sound, its shell began to deform, and the taut metal made a fragile cracking sound. After a violent sound of metal breaking, the robot's head and neck were completely separated. Bayi let go of his hand, and the robot's remains fell to the ground without any movement. It was strangled. Bayi looked at the mechanical head on the ground, and the light in his eyes gradually dimmed. He exhaled softly, raised his head and looked around, looking at the dozens of robot remains scattered around. Each of these robots fell to the ground in different postures. Some were broken into several pieces, with circuits scattered on the ground, some had dented chests and cracked metal surfaces, some had heads twisted beyond recognition. After attending the banquet for a while, Bayi hurriedly asked the waiter where the training room was. Unexpectedly, the waiter actually knew about it. After taking him to the training room, he went back to continue serving the guests. Pa, 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 pa. Fury walked in from outside the room with a smile and applauded, and handed Bayi a form. Congratulations, Mr. Bai, you did not insult the gift I gave you. What's this? Bayi took the list and asked curiously. Dr. Doom's training room has observation equipment that can map the body data of the person being observed through their movements. It is expected that the bench press will be 550 kg, the clean and jerk will be 370 kg, and the maximum speed will be 97 km per hour. Looking at the various numbers and symbols on the list, Bayi whispered the few lines he could understand. Your data is slightly higher than Steve's back then. I have no doubt that if he had a duel with you now, then he would. Can't beat me. Bayi raised the corners of his mouth, folded the list and put it in his pocket. Fury looked at the somewhat complacent guy in front of him and finished the second half of the sentence with an expressionless expression, only a 60% chance of winning. Steve Rogers not only possesses the world's top martial arts fighting skills, but is also a brilliant tactician and excellent battlefield commander, not to mention his indestructible shield. With these points, he can even knock the Hulk down with fists and kicks, or go for more than 10 rounds with the heavily armed Thanos, which can be said to be a real 50-50 split. And I don't think he would try to strangle a robot, you know they don't have to breathe, Fury added. Just as he was putting on his clothes, Bayi laughed dryly, thinking to himself that you, a blind man, happen to be the head of the real master. This can only be regarded as a small tribute. The Avengers are fighting Ultron's army, and guess who wants to strangle a robot? The two walked out of the room and left the mess in the training room to the still-living Doom robot to clean up. On the way, Bayi turned around and asked, "How are the preparations for the portal going?" According to Doom, it will take some time to recharge, and we are still discussing some details. Oh, every time a person is teleported, an astronomical amount of energy is consumed, and it is extremely difficult to accurately lock a safe target in the parallel universe. Considering that this zombie crisis originated from an invasion from the outer universe, if you choose to teleport quickly in order to save energy, you may fall directly into the hometown of the zombies or a similar place. The gain will outweigh the loss by then, and you will die before dawn. Bayi's face changed slightly, he touched his chin and nodded slowly. What Fury said makes sense. The Earth 2149 they are currently on is in a closed loop with the zombie sentinels' home planet Earth 91126. To put it simply, the zombie sentinels in the 91126 universe spread the virus to the 2149 universe, infecting the superheroes here, and then the zombie heroes here pass the virus to the uninfected sentinels in the 91126 universe. This cycle goes back and forth, and the actions of myself and others are breaking the original fixed cycle. If you are unlucky enough to land on Earth 91126, you will not encounter a dead world where zombies have been killed by zombie Spider-Man, but will only be another zombie universe that has just entered the end of the world. And that universe is going through the big event of Hulk World War, with the terrifying Green Death and Sentinels. For example, Ash Williams was also unlucky in the original plot. He stopped without switching several parallel universe portals, and finally threw him into a zombie universe where everyone is a werewolf. Thinking of this, Bayi said seriously, let's go find Doom and see how long it will take." Calculating the time, those zombie heroes may have already targeted Latveria. Dr. Doom stood at the door of the laboratory, staring at a metal platform in the center of the laboratory. The platform was spacious and sturdy, and seemed to be able to accommodate 5 or 6 people standing on it easily. It shines with silvery white light, revealing a high-tech atmosphere. Surrounding the platform are a group of busy experimenters. Wearing white lab coats and holding various instruments, they were busy operating and debugging. They shuttled back and forth, conducting experiments focused and orderly. But under Doom's cold gaze, they all inevitably trembled, fearing that they would make the monarch angry if they did something wrong. Doom will not forget to protect his people even in the end of the world, but this does not mean that he is a very tolerant king to his people. One of the reasons why the quality of the waiters here is so high is that their mortality rate is also quite high. Snapped. There was silence in the laboratory, with only the sound of broken cups echoing in the air, as if time had stopped. People around them focused their attention on an experimenter with broken glass at his feet. Dr. Doom's gaze was also cast over. His eyes were cold and sharp, revealing an elusive sense of oppression. The experimenter felt a chill running down his spine. His muscles were tense and he was trembling all over, like a frightened animal. Little beast. Crunch. Bayi suddenly opened the door and stepped into the room. He saw Dr. Doom standing there and chuckled. The dinner was quite good, Doom. Ha, the standard of hospitality at Doom Castle is world class, and anyone who is lucky enough to be a guest will only be full of praise for it. Dr. Doom turned around and smiled boldly at Bayi. Seeing that the Lord of Latveria's attention was diverted, the experimenter hurriedly picked up the glass fragments on the ground and threw them into the trash can. He cast a grateful look at Bayi and quickly returned to his post. Bayi nodded. That's true. This tastes much better than the fast food on the Shield aerospace carrier. Ha 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 ha, put aside the flattery, what do you want from Doom? Dr. Destruction's laughter stopped suddenly, and he returned to his cold look. I heard that teleportation requires more preparation time. Bayi asked, and Fury also walked in at this time. Good. Doom nodded, then led the two of them to the metal platform and explained. There are 200 Latvians selected by Dome, and you brought about 150 people, which greatly increased the number of people. Its burden. The computer is currently calculating a suitable destination to ensure that we can stay far away from those zombies. At the same time, some finishing work is being done. You don't want to reach another universe only to be overtaken by them, right? Bayi shook his head and said, let's just say how long it will take at least, and how long it will take for those zombies to attack. In 1 hour, everyone can be transported to a world without zombies in 1 hour. After pondering for a moment, Bayi nodded. The time advantage he gained from injuring Kuayin from the beginning was being wiped out little by little, and he could basically match the original plot in 1 hour. Besides, the people from Latveria have to go first. After glancing at Fury, who wanted to say something else, Bayi shook his head imperceptibly, and then replied, that's not a problem. Then start preparing. Fort Dome must not fall within an hour. Those zombie heroes are already on the way to assemble. After speaking, Doom raised his hand, and a holographic image appeared in the air, showing the familiar Eiffel Tower. The Iron Tower was filled with ordinary people who had been infected and turned into zombies. They were struggling unconsciously, making low roars from their mouths, and there were more or less traces of bites on their bodies. The American colonel stood under the Iron Tower, furiously hitting the ground with his shield. In front of him stood a crowd of zombie heroes. Fake, you idiots, why did you throw it away after taking 1 bite? Don't you know that a little contact with bodily fluids will infect them? Don't you know how unpalatable our meat is? And who is the idiot who polluted the tap water? Now we don't even have to bite, so we don't have to eat. His voice was full of anger and dissatisfaction, and his eyes revealed disappointment and disgust for these zombie heroes. You are so stupid and incompetent. How can you eat delicious meat with this bunch of trash? The other zombie heroes bowed their heads and remained silent. They had lost their minds under the influence of the zombie virus, leaving only their fierce appetite and instinctive desire to attack. Although they still retain the ability to think, they have become bloodthirsty zombies after all. Therefore, it is difficult to practice thrifty behavior, and it is difficult to finish one piece first before eating the others when faced with more than a dozen pieces of fresh meat. It was probably Liquid Man who did it. I saw him dangling in the water. Among the crowd, Daredevil raised his left hand with 3 fingers missing and whispered. What? You are slandering me. I did it to force the female mutant in the water who can walk through walls to come out, and didn't you get a piece of her meat in the end? As soon as these words came out, the Liquid Man, who was not far from Lawyer Ma, was suddenly startled and defended loudly. But the other zombie heroes looked at him with increasingly unkind looks. Liquid Man cursed secretly. He quickly sprayed the water from his legs and rushed towards the pool next to him at an alarming speed. As long as he falls into the water, he can crawl along the water pipe to a safe place. Don't go. However, at this moment, a strong sound wave suddenly came, hitting the Liquid Man's body directly. His body was instantly twisted and turned into a pile of small water droplets, which quickly evaporated and disappeared into the air. The strong sound waves completely destroyed the Liquid Man's structure and completely defeated him. The perspective slowly pulled back. Black Bolt's eyes were hollow and fierce, and the tuning fork on his forehead still glowed faintly. Then, he looked at the American colonel and said, now that the traitors have been eliminated, you might as well tell us what we are brought together for, otherwise I will go looking for meat elsewhere with my tetanus. Believe me, we can find fresh meat much faster than you can. This zombie virus inadvertently gave Black Bolt the ability to speak normally, and the zombie pug next to him also barked twice, as if approving of its master. Hey, don't be anxious, His Majesty the King, I was just about to say it. The American colonel let out a vicious laugh, revealing a bloody tooth. I think you all know that the survivors everywhere are now dead and infected. It is difficult to find the 3 or 2 big cats and kittens left hiding. But I happen to know a place full of living people. Place. Black Bolt's blind eyes narrowed, and he directly pointed out the unspoken part of the American colonel's words. If that's true, I think you went to eat early in the morning. Why did you invite us? You're right, I don't think you would have invited us. Unexpectedly, the American colonel admitted directly, but he then said, I called you here because the place is heavily guarded. It is impossible for the few people I brought to pry open that big can. Quote. Stop hiding it and tell me where that place is. Storm among the crowd shouted loudly, and suddenly the sky changed drastically and dark clouds rolled in. The American colonel replied, in Latveria, in Fort Dome. That Latveria has not been eaten yet. According to the data that Hawkeye found from the computer in the crashed aerospace carrier of S.H.I.E.L.D., Fury also took people there in the end. We can't eat with peace of mind even if they are here. And you know what's the best part? A large group of zombie heroes looked at each other, and after a brief silence, they directly cursed, "What the hell, why don't you just say it?" The American colonel picked up the shield and said, "They have a complete teleporter, which is used to escape from this world. It is used to go to a world full of fresh meat." After Black Bolt heard the explanation of the American colonel, his eyes flashed with excitement, and he could no longer suppress the ecstasy in his heart, and let out a loud roar. Powerful sound waves rushed out instantly, like a terrible wind sweeping across, and the Eiffel Tower began to shake violently. The huge metal structure trembled under the pressure of Black Bolt's sonic waves, and finally could not withstand the huge impact, and the entire tower began to shake. As the tower shook, the zombies hanging on it were lifted up by the violent vibrations. They struggled helplessly, but were soon torn into bloody mist by the impact. Blood and flesh splattered everywhere, and the horrific scene filled the air, dyeing everything around them bright red. In the end, the huge iron tower could not withstand the power of Black Bolt's roar and collapsed, with its debris scattered around and dust flying in the air. Tetanus, teleport, take us to Latveria. On the outskirts of Fort Dome, a green energy shield suddenly rose, covering everything within thousands of meters. As the energy shield forms, subtle energy fluctuations flow on the surface of the shield, like a transparent film. When this layer of energy slid over the vegetation on the ground, the plants shook slightly, as if they could feel this powerful force. The leaves quivered slightly, the flowers swayed slightly, and the grass blades in the grass undulated. This subtle change reveals a mysterious atmosphere, making the surrounding creatures feel a little trembling. Something is going on. Then, 100 meters away from the energy shield, a burst of dazzling white light pierced the darkness, accompanied by flying energy particles, flickering like a soul-eating will-o'-the-wisp. Woo! A huge pug zombie slowly walked out of the white light. Its body was huge and fat, its fur was in tatters, and there were rotten wounds and overflowing rotten blood. The whites of its eyes were sickly red, revealing endless longing. The huge mouth of the pug zombie opened its fangs and exposed them, with bright red blood stains remaining on them. Every drop of blood seemed to condense at the corner of the mouth, forming a blood-red trace. Deep in the darkness of the throat, a white hand bone could be vaguely seen. "Don't worry, Tetanus, we'll have tons of meat to eat soon." The pale hand slowly stretched out and gently touched the zombie dog's head. The zombie dog felt the touch of the hand, and the bones in its mouth were swallowed all at once. It rubbed its head against the hand and made a low and slightly joyful sound, as if it was full of intimacy with the hand. Although the dog has been reduced to a zombie, there seems to be some special bond between it and the hand, an emotional bond that transcends life and death. Seeing that his big dog calmed down, Black Bolt raised his head and said to the hundreds of zombies behind him, "Tetanus can only send us here. There is some kind of anti-teleportation device in Fort Doom. What if we destroy it?" Luke Cage asked. Black Bat King lowered his head and touched the Tetanus. The big dog was licking his arm with its tongue. "Then you won't need Tetanus anymore. Don't ask stupid questions, Cage." As the American colonel spoke, he raised his shield high, pressed it tightly against the hood, and scraped it violently. A sizzling friction sound followed his movements, and sparks flew everywhere. "Do you know," King Black Bolt suddenly spoke, the tuning fork on his forehead trembling slightly, "the beautiful blue city of Atalan on the back of the moon has been destroyed by the battle between me and my wife. She was first infected on the ground during a battle, and then she was bitten by tetanus and returned to the moon together. She tried to invite me to the dinner party, but at that time I resisted such blessings and roared her into pieces, and was accidentally infected by tetanus." A light bite on the arm. The American colonel put away his shield, looked at the chattering king of strangers and said, "Your Highness." But Black Bolt seemed not to have heard it, and continued, "After that, most of my fellow Inhumans have died in the aftermath of the battle or at the mouths of their own kind, and hunger is torturing the poor souls of the remaining tribe. Faced with such tragedy, elephants, but I can't help them, just because I—" "Your Highness, please be quiet for a moment. I know that the virus has enabled you to speak normally again, which is very good, but we have to find a way to get rid of this thing now. The American colonel shouted. Quote. Feel sorry. Black Bolt walked to the edge of the energy shield. He took a deep breath and his chest quickly expanded. Then he roared, and powerful sound waves roared out instantly. Energy ripples visible to the naked eye spread and hit the shield. The ground was cracked and rocks were lifted up. The zombies were frightened by the huge sound wave and scattered to avoid it. The energy shield vibrated violently and was teetering, as if it might collapse at any time. Black Bolt's sonic shock waves continuously hit the surface of the energy shield, making a deafening roar. The energy fluctuations on the cover continued to fluctuate, flashing with unstable light. Just when Black Bolt's roar gradually dissipated and the barrier was about to regain stability, Red Tank, Meatball and Luke Cage in the corpse group rushed out and hit the place where Black Bolt roared with all their strength. Boom! When they hit the energy shield, there was a huge impact sound. The energy shield trembled and was under unprecedented pressure. Under the impact of the Red Tank, a small crack appeared in the energy shield, and the subsequent impact of the Meatball and Luke Cage expanded the crack. As the impact increased, the cracks gradually expanded, eventually completely destroying the energy shield. The American colonel pointed fiercely in the direction of the castle and shouted, "Come on! The delicious fresh meat is in it, but there is no place beyond this village." Iron Fist and Sabertooth Tiger quickly rushed to the front. Without any hesitation, they jumped directly over the line drawn by the energy shield. Suddenly there was a loud noise, boom. The landmine detonated, and Iron Fist was directly blown to pieces. The saber-toothed tiger was lucky enough to keep its head, but its body was nowhere to be found. Its head rolled around on the ground, screaming in pain, "Quick! Someone get rid of me quickly. Come here, I can still heal myself." The zombies around looked at each other in confusion. Death Girl rubbed her inch-long nails, shook her head slightly, and said with a hint of helplessness, "Stop dreaming, Victor, our self-healing ability has long since expired." She was right. Even Wolverine, Deadpool and other people with extremely strong self-healing abilities would not be able to survive this virus for long. Bayi on the castle in the distance put down his telescope, and he just took in everything in front of him. "Thor, do you see that over there? Do what the God of Thunder should do." A confident smile appeared on the corner of Thor's mouth. "I am happy to oblige." The hammer in his hand whirred, and the electric light continued to flow on the surface of the hammer. A bolt of thunder broke through the dark clouds in the sky and hit the zombies hard. "My legs!" Daredevil fell to the ground, his entire lower body missing. "Ooh, my hand is gone." Another zombie howled miserably. His arm was shattered by lightning, leaving only incomplete limbs dripping with blood. "Stop yelling. Isn't it just missing arms and legs? Isn't the saber-toothed tiger still healthy with only one head left?" The American colonel shouted angrily while holding up his shield. "Actually, I'm not very good." "Shut up. The Red Tank guys, come forward and clear the way first to make sure that nothing will explode under our feet. Anyone who can fly will leave from the sky to distract them, and the rest will rush with me." As soon as the American colonel finished speaking, he saw Colossus, Red Tank, Luke Cage and other rough-skinned macho men rushing towards Fort Doom. Explosions sounded one after another at their feet, but none of them were injured at all. The remaining zombies followed closely behind, led by the American colonel. Chapter 51. Flying zombies such as angels and falcons gradually approached Fort Dome. They soared in the air, waving their broken wings and making low screams. "Come on, there are no mines in the sky. Let the guys on the ground go to the mines, let's start eating first." Several missiles flew rapidly across the night sky, leaving a bright trail of tail flames. They accurately targeted flying zombies such as angels and falcons, and shot them without mercy. There was a series of huge explosions, flames flying and smoke filling the air. The missile hit zombies such as Angel and Falcon, blowing them apart. Debris and flesh flew in the air and scattered on the ground. More huge fireballs and hot blasts of air swept over. Vultures and other flying zombies were instantly swallowed up in the flames, making shrill screams. Thor had already gone downstairs at this time, preparing to stop the zombies with others. Looking at the lively scene in the sky, Bayi took out the Book of Death with an expressionless face, and his eyes fell on the burning fireplace nearby. The flames were beating and dancing with light red light. He gently stroked the writing, feeling its rough gray coating and said, "Open your eyes, I know you can hear me." The gray book of death suddenly exuded a cold aura, and 2 cracks on the cover opened with a pop, revealing a pair of eyeless white and blood-red eyes. Then, under the 2 cracks, a big mouth full of fangs grinned. "What? Williams didn't dare to touch me, so he sent you an unknown person." "Ash Williams is dead," Bayi said calmly, his eyes always locked on the blood-red eyes of the Book of Death. "This book has its own self-awareness and thoughts. In life, I like to watch others being tortured. The entire book is even made of human skin. Every page inside is full of harmful things. It can be said to be a truly evil book." Book. The Book of Death laughed wildly, and the mouth on the cover opened even wider, almost touching Bayi's fingers. "Oh. Ha 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 ha. It's a good death, but it's a pity that he won't die." "Then what do you want to do?" "Huh, Williams told you before he died that I could save the world." "Then you poor thing will be greatly disappointed. The origin of the virus is outside the earth and has nothing to do with magic. But if you kneel down and beg me, I might." The pair of blood-red evil eyes squeezed, and at some point a wrinkled little nose appeared in the center of the 3 gaps. "Please," Bayi sneered, took the book and walked closer to Bai Huo, feeling the hot breath and shouted, "You should beg me." He did not hesitate to tear out some pages from the Book of Death in his hand, and those pages were covered with writings written in human blood. He threw the pages of the book into the fireplace, and the flames immediately burned more intensely. Every time a page was thrown into the fire, the Book of Death let out a scream, and the sound of pain echoed in the air. "You lunatic, stop it. Don't you know how I exist in the world of black magic? How many people want me but can't get it?" But Bayi seemed not to hear it, and continued to tear off the pages of the book and said to himself, "Do you think you can stay out of it as a book? You look like you are alive, your book cover is human skin, you every line of is written in human blood. And your book pages, I don't know, but they should be similar. In short, after those hungry zombies crawl into the castle and eat all the living creatures here, you will look no different from a cup of sweet and delicious desserts." As more pages were thrown into the fire, the screams from the Book of the Dead became more frequent, until it became unbearable and screamed, "Enough, enough. I believe in you, okay. Don't tear me apart." Quote, "Hee hee, wouldn't it be better if we did this earlier?" The White Knight monster smiled and stopped moving, but moved closer to the fireplace. "Stop, stop, it's too close." The pair of red eyes stared at the fireplace which was very close to it. "Look, those zombies not only want to eat me, but also want to treat you as dessert, so our interests are the same. We all need to escape from this world. There is a teleporter downstairs now. I can leave just fine. Take your book with you." Quote. "Do you think I will believe the empty promises of you humans? You are just hypocritical and fragile little things. You will do anything to survive a little longer." Bayi touched his chin. This thing didn't look easy to deceive. After thinking about it, he grabbed the pendant in front of his neck, showed it to the Book of Death and said, "No matter what the past or the future will be, I can swear to Emperor Waishan that I will never lie to anyone today." Book of Death narrowed his red eyes and quickly assessed the person in front of him. It noticed that the man was wearing the symbol of the Holy of Holies, which meant he was supposed to be a sorcerer. Everyone knows that wizards attach great importance to oaths. If the man in front of him dares to swear to the faith of Emperor Waishan. Since you dare to swear to Emperor Waishan, it means you won't lie. The voice of the Book of Death was low and hoarse. "Tell me, what are your plans?" Just as the remaining zombie heroes rushed towards Fort Dome, suddenly a large black cloud fell from the sky, wrapping them like magic and trapping them. This black cloud is both dense, exuding a strange aura. "What is this? Did you do it, Storm?" Black Bolt asked in a daze. He couldn't help but stop and stared at the black cloud warily. Storm also looked confused, shook her head and said, "I don't know. This black cloud appeared so suddenly, and I can't control it." Deep roars and groans came from the black clouds surrounding the zombie heroes, as if countless ghosts were roaring in them. The shadows in the black clouds gradually condensed into shape, revealing countless vague black shadows. The American colonel snorted coldly and glanced at the shadows in the black clouds. It must be some trick of Chi-Chi or Doom. They are at the end of their rope. Keep charging. Let's see who doesn't charge. The American colonel gave the order without fear. He led the zombie heroes and continued to charge forward. However, as soon as he finished speaking, the shadows in the black cloud began to become clearer. They have humanoid outlines, but their faces are twisted and terrifying, exuding a disturbing aura. A dozen pairs of pale, rotten arms suddenly sprang out of the black mist, grabbing Daredevil as he crawled on the ground like a ghost. These rotten arms are like tentacles bound by darkness, twisting convulsively, trying to drag Daredevil deeper into the darkness. They are lifeless, with rotten skin and exude a disgusting rancid smell. What the hell is this? The captured Daredevil screamed. Steve, save me, save! He was caught by those rotten arms and was thrown into the black mist. In an instant, blood spurted out from the mist and scattered all over the ground. The black mist seemed to be alive, surging out from under the castle and spreading towards the mountains in the distance. The outlines of the mountains that were originally clearly visible were now as hazy as a dream. This is exactly the same prophecy that Ash Williams has heard, that an army of darkness will rise. Matt, what's wrong with you? The American colonel who heard Daredevil's scream turned around, only to find a pool of dirty blood on the ground and his arm retracting into the mist. Storm, who had clearly seen what had just happened, trembled. He was dragged away by a bunch of hands. I see it. Everyone, come to my side, defensive formation. The zombie wearing the stars and stripes raised his shield again and shouted. And those black shadows will never be idle. They emerge from the fog and reveal their true forms, countless moving and standing corpses. These undead have no positive emotions, their faces are pale and dull, and their eyes are flashing with cold red light. This group of beings are driven by endless hatred, just to take revenge on those zombie heroes. Their bodies were mutilated, missing arms and legs, and the robes they wore were in tatters, as if they had been corroded for hundreds of years, with only broken pieces of cloth fluttering in the wind. It must be some weird thing created by Chi-Chi. Kill them. The American colonel glared at the group of undead in front of him and threw his shield with all his strength. The shield whizzed through the air and penetrated 7 or 8 undead at once. It shattered into pieces instantly and their bodies were scattered on the ground. This sudden power surprised the American colonel. He was just testing it first as usual, but he didn't expect those undead to be so fragile. His terrifying face was stunned for a moment, but then a joyful smile appeared on his face. These things are vulnerable, he said happily, full of confidence and fighting spirit. He had realized that the enemy he faced was not as powerful as he thought, and could even be said to be fragile. However, just when he was proud, countless undead souls poured out of the black mist like a tide, directly overwhelming the zombie formation. The undead are numerous and menacing. Facing this pressure, the zombie heroes will inevitably feel a little nervous. The American colonel shouted to the sky and shouted to the zombies beside him, "Don't worry, guys. We will not be defeated by these fragile corpses. Charge. Unlimited fresh meat is inside the castle." A black figure with sharp claws walked leisurely among the undead. He entangled the undead with a sticky black substance and completely tore them apart. It was the venom. Gambit King kept throwing cards, causing the undead to flip over, but judging from the thickness of the playing cards in his hand, it seemed that he wouldn't be able to throw them for long. Sunspot roared, his whole body flashing with flames, burning the surrounding undead to ashes, and the meatballs simply rolled over. Super-powered zombies of all kinds were busy using their own abilities to kill the undead. Although they were killing extremely fast, the hundreds of thousands of undead still slowed down their pace. On the castle, the Book of Death grinned at Bayi as if he was taking credit. What? It's thanks to those zombies that ate so many people, otherwise I wouldn't be able to summon so many undead. I've spent a lot of money. Wait. You'll take me with you, right? So. Bayi did not answer the book's question directly, but looked at the zombies fighting in the black fog below the castle and the undead all over the mountains and said casually. Although these magical creations are large in quantity, their individual combat capabilities are at the level of ordinary people, and although they are undead, they have no immortality and can be beaten to death by 2 slaps. It's okay to let them hold back the zombie hero for a while, but want to rely on them to defeat the zombies. That's just a dream. After saying that, he lowered his head and looked down at the castle. Several figures had arrived at the gate at some point. It seemed that their speed was a little faster than black mist. After thinking about it, Bayi turned around and walked back to the castle holding the Book of Death. The red tank approached Fort Dome with heavy steps, then raised a huge foot and kicked hard against the metal gate. A thunderous roar resounded through the sky, and the metal door flew backwards like a cannonball. It flew through the air like a meteor and hit the wall. Bricks and stones flew everywhere and dust filled the air. Get out of here, Rose. You cheated before, this time I'm not only going to you, but I'm going to eat you too. He entered the interior of Fort Dome without stopping, completely unaware that there were not many people behind him, only Colossus and Luke Cage were still following him. Where are the Colonel and the others? And what's that thing outside the door? Cage looked back, only to find that it was pitch black outside the door, and asked doubtfully. Whatever, I've long disliked those clowns in the Avengers. It's their loss if they don't come over. Let's just eat what's ours. Colossus said angrily, grabbing the long wooden table in the center of the hall to see if there was anyone hiding under it. Cage's face instantly darkened. I am also an Avenger. It's not too late for you to quit now. Our X-Men don't only accept mutants. No. As they said that, they walked towards the back of the throne, but suddenly found 3 roads in front of them, which were extremely deep and looked quite long. After looking at each other for a few times, the red tank took the lead and said, let's split up. This way our chances of finding fresh meat will be tripled, and at the same time we won't have to snatch the meat to eat. It all depends on personal luck. Not bad. Colossus nodded to his old enemy and walked into the hole on the left. Red Tank and Luke Cage chose the middle and right side respectively, and soon the throne hall returned to silence, leaving only a faint green light sliding through the walls. As Colossus walked through the dark corridor, he muttered, I'm starving to death. My stomach is empty. Fortunately, I found a school before I came. Recalling the scene of enjoying the feast in that school, Colossus showed an evil smile. He remembered the fear and despair of those students as he hunted, and these memories brought a different kind of joy to his heart. Some people tried to beat him away with tables, chairs and benches, which was really cute. The chewy and delicious taste will never be forgotten in my life. Just thinking about this made him a little irritated. There were fewer and fewer living people in the world, but more and more zombies. Soon they would fight for the last bite of meat. I don't know if the teleporter thing is true, or maybe it's just an excuse for the American colonel to trick them into coming to Latveria. Colossus' eyes suddenly locked on the end of the corridor. He squinted and vaguely saw a figure. He quickly rubbed his eyes to make sure he saw it correctly. It was a man holding a gray book. The man looked panicked when he saw Colossus, and immediately turned around and ran away. Don't run. Colossus smiled ferociously and rushed forward with heavy steps, his mouth constantly letting out low and bloodthirsty laughter. As long as he can eat another bite of meat, it's worth letting him die. The figure holding the book escaped Colossus' pursuit at an alarming speed, which surprised Colossus a little. He didn't think too much, he just chased the figure desperately, but no matter what, the figure always seemed to keep a certain distance. The longer you run now, the more delicious it will taste later. Finally, the figure suddenly turned into a room and quickly closed the door tightly. Colossus roared angrily and slammed his fist against the door. The door shattered and he rushed into the room instantly. However, what he saw in front of him was a surprisingly large and empty space, which was a bit confusing. The size of this room exceeded Colossus' imagination, and there were no walls or furniture, only smooth metal floors. This reminded him of the X-Men's Danger Training Room, which was a virtual environment simulation space, but it seemed more real and realistic. At this moment, a bullet violently hit Colossus' metal forehead, making a crisp impact. However, to Colossus, this was only a slight touch and did no harm at all. In the corner of the room, a figure emerged from the air, with a gray book thrown at his feet. He held a gun in his left hand and an oversized black travel bag behind his back. He smiled at Colossus. Colossus laughed wildly and drooled. Brother, do you think the bullet can hurt me? You brought yourself to my mouth. He opened a pair of big metal hands and pounced forward. Bayi looked at the Colossus who rushed towards him, indifferently raised the gun in his hand and started shooting continuously. The large caliber bullets hit Colossus hard, but they were all bounced off by his hard body. The more bullets he fired, the crazier Colossus's voice became. Ha ha ha, that's so funny. Do you want to laugh me to death? Don't resist. This thing can't even make me tickle. I will be merciful and kill you first. And just when Colossus was only a dozen meters away from Bayi, a small piece of the metal floor in front of Bayi suddenly rose up. The metal plate floats smoothly in the air like a wide stepping stone. He put away his gun and stepped lightly on the metal plate, leaping several meters high. Colossus, who was sprinting desperately, didn't expect it and hit the wall directly. At the same time, Bayi pressed the pistol lightly and quickly threw it out. Before the pure metal man could react, the pistol exploded near him, making a loud noise and a ball of flame enveloped him. Colossus' speed in his transformed form is even slower than in his human form, which is one of the few shortcomings of his metal form. Of course, this gun was not the one given to him by the system, but a gadget he got from the equipment department on S.H.I.E.L.'s aerospace carrier. They had nothing that couldn't explode. Bayi walked away and took out a huge rifle from the huge travel bag behind him. The barrel of the gun was as transparent as crystal, and a mysterious red substance flowed inside and made a sizzling sound. Shaking his head, Colossus gasped and pulled his head out of the wall, looking at the guy standing far away with a pair of silver eyes. "Come here. Ah, if I want to eat you, I have to kill you." Colossus let out a violent roar, becoming more powerful and rushing towards Bayi crazily. Bayi held the rifle in his hand tightly, staring at the zombies getting closer and said slowly, "I have been thinking about a question." He pressed the trigger, the rifle buzzed, and a dark red laser shot out from the muzzle, heading straight into Colossus' eyeballs. Before the tough man could close his eyelids, the laser penetrated his eyeballs and ruthlessly destroyed his brain tissue. Colossus, who had lost his brain, fell limply to the ground, sliding close to Bayi, bleeding from his 7 orifices, leaving a long trail of blood behind him. Bayi gently raised his feet and let the large piece of metal slide past his feet. "If your eyeballs are metallized, how can you see?" Putting away the gun, he turned his gaze to the distant air and nodded slightly. At the same moment, the invisible woman emerged from the void, and she reluctantly smiled at Bayi. Just now, she was secretly lifting the ground so that Bayi could use her strength. There was no communication between the two in advance, but she certainly had this tactical ability. This is where the body data was tested before Bayi, and the remains had long been swept away by the Doom robot. The moment the 3 zombies entered Fort Dome, they were discovered by Dome. Then he used the spell that had been engraved on the wall for many years to make the 3 blind men lose their way. After receiving the news, Bayi volunteered to deal with Colossus. The invisible woman happened to be nearby, so she came over to help. "How do you know that his eyeballs are fragile?" Logan doesn't seem to know this. Susan glanced at the body of Colossus on the ground, picked up the Book of Death and walked over to hand it to Bayi. Bayi smiled and said nothing. "You can't tell the invisible woman that Colossus from the 1610 universe was manipulated by others for the same reason, right? It's really embarrassing for one of the most famous mutants on the planet to be scared to death by Falcon holding a small pistol." Basically, the eyeballs of most Colossus in the universe are the most vulnerable part, but the surface of the eyeballs, like his body, turns into silvery white, making people subconsciously ignore this weakness. In addition, the reason why he used S.H.I.E.L.'s special laser gun instead of a pistol was not because Bayi was not confident in his marksmanship, but because the Colossus of the Ultimate Universe did not dare to bet on whether his eyeballs could block bullets, and he also did not dare to bet on whether the pistol bullets are powerful enough. "Is there any news from Doom? Did he say how long it will take before the transmission can start?" The 2 walked out of the training room, Bayi asked on the road. He said it was faster than expected, and that the first wave of transmission would be activated in just over 30 minutes. Of course, he also emphasized that the people of Latveria must leave first. "Really, we are the superheroes, and he looks like he is afraid that we will run away." Susan shook her head helplessly. Could it be that Doom didn't even trust her? Look on the bright side, at least he didn't show any disrespect for human life. Bayi shrugged. The invisible woman pressed the headset on her ears, turned to Bayi and said, "Luke Cage and Red Tank have also been eliminated." Bayi raised his eyebrows and asked curiously, "Oh, how did they do it?" The invisible woman frowned slightly and replied, "Cage was completely burned to ashes by the humanoid. As for the Red Tank, the Scarlet Witch sent him to California. But I heard that Wanda was also very tired and passed out. I don't know when she will wake up. The castle basement is dark and damp. The stone bricks on the walls have been stained by the erosion of time, with cracks and water stains scattered throughout. The ground is covered with thick dust, and every step will stir up a cloud of dust that fills the air. The ceiling above the head was shaking, and dust and pebbles fell from the cracks, like fragments of the castle's rich history. The zombie heroes seemed to have moved closer to the castle, but no one knew what was happening outside at this time. In the center of the castle's basement stood the massive teleporter, a complex metal structure with an intricate network of wires and equipment attached to it. The surface of the teleporter shone with a faint blue light, exuding a mysterious aura. Next to the teleporter, a green-robed metal man stood with his arms folded. "Why did you move the teleporter here?" Susan asked first. On their way to Bayi, Doom suddenly summoned them and told them to go to the basement. He also said that he had already informed others. Dr. Doom slowly waved his arm, and the heavy brick wall on the left side of the room made a clicking sound and then fell down. Dust flew in the air, filling the room and obscuring sight. When the dust gradually dispersed, they discovered that the exposed laboratory was exactly where Bayi had been before. The dilapidated walls, old instruments and scattered documents all seemed to be frozen in the past. Dr. Doom's voice came slowly. "The location of the teleporter has never changed. It was just a blindfold before." There was a hint of pride and confidence in his tone. "Doom needs your wrong knowledge to integrate into the runes here, so as to interfere with the zombies when they attack." Bayi shrugged and said, "Okay, where are the others? Where are the first batch of Latvians you want to teleport away? We are all here, and they haven't arrived yet." Doom raised his hand and snapped his fingers with his metal glove. The sound was particularly clear. Then many civilians walked out of the depths of the room. Although they looked a little ragged and tired, and each of them was carrying a large bag, there were no other problems. "I quarantined them here an hour after the crisis began. As I said, Latveria is immune to this plague." Looking left and right, the invisible woman frowned and said, "Why are there only those waiters in the castle here? Are you going to let them be eaten?" According to Doom's standards, they do not meet the minimum requirements for continuing civilization, but I will not leave them to those monsters. Doom has his own mercy, Sue. In the restaurant, after returning the last chair to its original position, the last greasy plate was washed and placed on the water control rack. The waiters in black took out a small piece of white medicine from their coat pockets and put it into their mouths without hesitation. After a few seconds, they began to cough slowly, with the corners of their mouths rising slightly. White foam overflowed from the corners of their mouths, like traces of smiles. Their eyes became quiet and peaceful, and their pupils gradually expanded, squeezing out their irises. The bodies of the waiters in black trembled slightly, as if they were beating in soft music. They fell to the ground quietly, smiles still hanging on their lips. A silence enveloped the restaurant, and the waiters in black lay peacefully on the ground, no longer in any pain. Susan's eyes widened. She opened her mouth not knowing what to say, and finally fell silent. She no longer had any reason to accuse anyone. During the conversation, a large number of people poured into the basement door, and they were SHIELD survivors. Fury walked towards Bayi and the invisible woman, exchanged glances and then walked to the teleporter alone, with Iron Man following. "How are you preparing the teleporter?" "The undead army summoned by Mr. Bayi has almost been consumed. At this time, the zombies are preparing to break through your last shield," Fury asked softly after walking to Doom's side. Doom still had the same cold look. "The charging has been completed and is being prepared to be released. Just relax, Fury. Doom will never make a joke. He will definitely do what he promised." The teleporter in the center of the room hummed low. Doom walked over and tapped the control panel a few times, then waved to the crowd behind him and shouted, "Why don't you leave? Do you dare to ask Doom to wait for you?" His voice echoed in the room, like thunder. So full of majesty. The civilians looked at each other, and then a few people came out and quickly stood on the teleporter. They watched in amazement as a bright blue light burst out from around the teleporter, lingering around them like an elf dance. Then the energy formed a huge vortex, completely surrounding them, and countless tiny light spots floated in the air like stars. "Stand still and don't move." The blue vortex kept spinning and disappeared with a pop when it reached its peak. The people in the vortex also disappeared, as if being sucked into another dimension, and the room returned to calm, leaving only a faint echo. Looking at the disappearing people, Doom turned to look at Bayi and others and said, In order to improve the probability of the continuation of human civilization, each transmission will limit the number of people and reset its destination. After computer calculations, the destination will definitely not be there or zombies. You may think that Doom is deliberately distracting you, but no, the people of Latveria will do the same. Each of them carries the basic materials and knowledge to survive even in a barren land. Quote. Then he pointed at the invisible woman. Sue, follow me, I will protect you and your family. Susan was stunned for a moment, then looked at Fury. The latter sighed and nodded. To be honest, I still have something to ask for. Bayi suddenly stepped forward and said. Oh, Dr. Doom looked at him with some confusion. That's it. Bayi leaned over and whispered in his ear. After listening, Doom was silent for a moment, then nodded slowly and walked to the laboratory next door, picked up a few piles of documents and handed them to Bayi, who was eager to try, and then looked at him deeply. After taking the documents and flipping through them twice, Bayi handed them to the approaching Punisher and asked them to be put into the large backpack that had been carried all the way from the space aircraft carrier. Wanda and Quicksilver walked out of the SHIELD team and stood next to Bayi, waiting for him to speak. The blue vortex kept appearing and disappearing, and the number of civilians in Latveria became less and less. Soon, only the SHIELD team was left in the room. Dr. Doom stood in front of the control panel and said without looking back, "Okay, you guys should hurry up." The ceiling suddenly shook violently, accompanied by a huge roar. The entire room seemed to lose its balance in the violent vibrations, and the walls were crumbling. As the shaking intensified, several pieces of the ceiling came loose, making a heavy knocking sound. Debris and dust fell, filling the air. Cracks also began to appear on the ground, spreading quickly like spider webs. It was a bit scary just now, but no zombies came in. Bayi stood in front of the teleporter, squinting his eyes slightly as he stared at the SHIELD personnel who were constantly being teleported away. Fury stood beside him, holding the last cigar in his hand, with a hint of exhaustion in his eyes. He smoked the cigar silently, letting the smoke linger around him, seeming to bring a sense of tranquility. Can you believe it? Just one day ago, I was arguing with the president about funding for next year, and Steve said he planned to retire and become a farmer after training a new team of Avengers. Xavier is planning to give another speech to let the world know that mutants can live in harmony with others. The one-eyed dragon frowned slightly. He felt a little sad about all this, but there was nothing he could do about it. They stood there quietly, watching those people disappear one by one in the blue light. The moment everyone disappeared, the conveyor made a faint buzzing sound, as if saying goodbye. A few minutes later, the only SHIELD personnel in the room were Banner, who was still lying on the stretcher and sleeping, as well as Thor, Fury and Iron Man. The Fantastic Three and Doom stand together. To be honest, aside from the several battles that almost killed each other, the relationship between them can be said to be frenemies and friends. Byakuya stood on the other side, with Quicksilver, Punisher and Scarlet Witch following behind him. This is the last group of people to leave. What? Why not bring a few more superpowers? The other superpowers are not familiar with him, and they are more willing to obey Fury's orders than Bayi, or simply go to another world and continue to be superheroes. Like Hyperion and his fake Justice League. Dumb, are you ready for the surprise for those guys? Of course, in addition, Doom has set a program. After we leave, the portal will first self-destruct internally, and then the Doom robot will completely dismantle it. Bayi nodded and stepped into the blue vortex, followed by several people behind him. He held the Book of Death and smiled at it, a mysterious light shining in his eyes. Now everyone can leave this world safely, Bayi said softly. The Book of Death echoed. Yes, yes, those monsters will never catch up with us. Its voice was full of ridicule and joking. Bayi frowned, feeling a little confused. Huh. Us? Yeah, aren't we leaving this world now? Do you still have something to do? Book of Death blinked his red eyes, as if he was a little amused by Bayi's question. This person is too careless. Bayi slapped his thigh and said to the Book of Death with sudden realization, yes, I do have one thing I haven't done yet. Thank you for reminding me, otherwise I will regret it for the rest of my life. The Book of Death grinned with a big smile and said flatteringly, no, this is a trivial matter. A smart person like you can think of it without me reminding you. Bayi touched the spine of the Book of Death with satisfaction, feeling the cold touch. Then, he suddenly threw the Book of Death out with his backhand and hit the wall with a dull impact. The Book of Death trembled on the wall and screamed in horror. "Ah! What have you done? Didn't you swear to Emperor Waishan that you would take me out of this world?" Its red eyes were full of disbelief and despair. Bayi smiled slightly and gently touched his chin. "Ah, it seems that there is something like this." Just when hope was about to rekindle in the eyes of the Book of Death, Bayi said again, "But I don't believe in Emperor Waishan. There are so many people calling him every day to believe in him, and..." He looked sympathetically at the Book of Death on the wall. He used too much force and actually smashed it into the wall. "I really didn't lie to anyone today, you are just a broken book." The Book of Death trembled, its voice full of fear and despair. "No. You can't abandon me. I can give you endless power to help you rule the world." "Thank you, I will do it next time." Bayi was in the blue vortex. He looked at the Book of Death, winked slightly, then waved his hand and was taken away by the teleporter. The Book of Death was embedded in the wall, shouting desperately, "No, wait, Doom, you can take me with you, right?" It looked at Dr. Doom anxiously. Dr. Doom sneered without looking back and looked at the Book of Death with disdain. "Take you with me? How arrogant and childish. Doom has as many spells as stars, you are worthless to me." It turned to Fury on the side and said hopefully, "Please, brother, take me with you. I can help you restore your lost eyes, and they will be more useful than the original ones." Fury stared at the Book of Death with one eye, and after a long time he uttered one word, "No." The Book of the Dead trembles. "The handsome blonde man over there. Do you want to add another handy hammer? You, yellow stone monster. I can make the stone on your body harder and 10 times bigger. You are not rolling your eyes." The sleeping one. A black zombie more than 10 meters tall, wearing a blue and white tights, punched the shield covering the castle with great force. Hundreds of zombies of various shapes surrounded him. At the feet of the zombies, there were countless pale white severed limbs and corpse fragments scattered, which were the last remnants of the previous undead army. At this moment, the black mist gradually dissipated. The American colonel raised his shield and shouted, "Smash it, Bill. That shield won't last long. This man's name is Goliath, which means a mythical giant who can grow himself into a giant." He didn't hesitate to pound the shield hard with both fists, each impact bringing huge power. His fist smashed against the shield, making a deafening roar, as if it was about to knock down the entire castle. Earth and rocks flew, debris was scattered, and each impact dimmed the shield. "I said, are you really sure we can eat meat here? We have been following you for so long without even getting a bite." Gambit King suddenly stood up and hit the ground hard with his stick with an angry look on his face. "So far we have lost more than 10 or 20 people, and we haven't even seen a single living person." "Shut up," the American colonel suddenly shouted, and threw his shield with his backhand. Like a bolt of lightning streaking through the air, the shield spun rapidly and mercilessly split the Gambit King's head, cutting it in half. The group of corpses that were a little restless just now fell silent and looked at the American colonel. Boom! The huge zombie punched the shield, and with the release of huge force, the energy layer of the shield instantly collapsed. The giant zombie's fist hit the castle wall hard, and the shock spread throughout the building. The wall cracked under the huge impact, and rocks flew everywhere. "What else are you looking at? Go in and eat," the American colonel shouted loudly, grabbed his shield and rushed towards the castle with its door open. It had long been kicked open by red tanks. "It should be over here. How many times have we walked on this broken road?" The American colonel led a large group of zombies and rushed into the basement in a menacing manner. As soon as they entered the door, they were shocked by the sight before them. In the basement, a dozen robots were smashing a pile of metal fragments wantonly, making a deafening collision sound. "Where's this guy? I'm asking you where he is." Hercules was stunned for a while, then grabbed the American colonel's collar and shouted. They had gone all the way to get here just to get a few mouthfuls of meat, but now let alone meat, not even a hair was visible. No matter how much he respects Steve in normal times, he absolutely cannot tolerate such an incompetent leader at this time. The American colonel hesitated for half a second, then pushed the Greek zombie away and cursed, "Didn't I tell you? They must have teleported away before we came. Quick, stop those robots." The furious zombies pounced on it, tearing the robot apart with their claws, grinding their teeth on the metal skull, venting their hunger hatefully. Soon the dozen Doom robots were dismantled into pieces, and the smell of burnt circuits filled the room. It's just that the parts of the teleporter were already broken after the transmission was completed. What the Doom robot did just now was just cleaning up the final mess. So what should we do now? Can this thing still be used? Hercules picked up a metal part on the ground, touched his head and muttered. Nonsense. What's that on the wall? Just as the American colonel touched the Book of Death on the wall, a floor suddenly rose in the center of the room, and a green holographic projection appeared above the floor, revealing the image of Dr. Doom. Doom in the holographic image sneered directly in front of him, his voice full of ridicule and disdain. Stupid zombies, you came too late. The fresh meat you desire has been safely teleported away by Doom, and the teleportation device was also destroyed by Doom. It could be seen from the way he held his head high that even though he was not here at the moment, he was still enjoying the defeat of the zombies in the basement. The American colonel could no longer control his emotions. He gritted his fangs, and then let out a loud roar, "Ah, dumb." As he roared, he raised the shield in his hand and threw it violently to the floor under the holographic image. The shield collided violently with the tiles, making a crisp impact sound. After the tiles shattered, the holographic image began to gradually disappear, and the image of the enemy that made him angry gradually dissipated into the air, and finally disappeared completely. HMPH, what the hell are you? He turned around and plucked the gray book from the wall, which seemed to blink just now. Don't eat me. Don't eat me. Book of Death's already wrinkled face was now even more squeezed into a ball, begging frantically. After looking up and down, the American colonel said with disdain, "It's a tattered book. Dead people taste like shit. Why should I eat your skin, which has been expired for who knows how many years?" The book was silent for a long time before it asked with difficulty, "You mean you won't eat me? But you can give it a try." Ah, there was a squeaking sound, and the zombie wearing the stars and stripes tore off half of the page and stuffed it into his mouth. The paper hissed in his mouth. He chewed it hard twice, and then spit it out hard. The paper ball was spat out along with the saliva and fell to the ground. It tastes awful. The American colonel's attention was still focused on the book in his hand. Suddenly, he felt another floor rising behind him. He turned his head, and there seemed to be a faint dripping sound coming from under the floor. Next to her, Hercules scratched his scalp and asked curiously, "What is that thing?" He walked over to the floor and took a closer look. He looked down, his eyes widened, and found a green countdown device underneath. He muttered to himself in confusion, "Hey Steve, this thing is..." Around Doom Castle there was silence. Suddenly, the ground began to crack and bulge. The stones and soil were squeezed and deformed by some kind of shock wave, forming countless cracks that spread quickly. Immediately afterwards, flames shot up into the sky and engulfed the entire castle in an instant. The tiles on the roof flew in the air and turned into ashes. The marble statues made by the world's top sculptors melted into a viscous liquid and were then blown away. Where Doomburg was originally located, a mushroom cloud rose into the sky. Hank was sitting at the dining table, wearing a dirty Ant-Man red uniform. He was blowing a light tune from his mouth, looking very cheerful. He was holding a knife and fork in his hand, cutting a piece of raw meat gracefully. The teeth gently bite the fresh meat, and then a small crunching sound is made. The freshly cut tender meat was gradually finely ground in his mouth, slowly releasing its deliciousness. Juice slipped from the corner of his mouth and wet his chin, and he grinned and muttered to himself. HMPH. Latveria. These idiots really think they can get benefits there. The aerospace aircraft carrier should have seen that they are not easy to deal with. Fortunately, I didn't go there both times. There are still many survivors on the ground to find. Why do we have to chew on those hard bones with few pieces of meat? But it's just a coincidence that no one is trying to compete with us for the meat. At this moment, Hank was completely unaware that several screws behind his back began to float quietly, getting further and further away from the ground. At first, they trembled slightly, as if attracted by some mysterious force. As the strength increased, the screw began to rise slowly, leaving its fixed position and suspended in midair. A faint light flickered on their surface, shining like a faint arc of electricity. They seemed to be driven by some supernatural force, floating quietly in the air behind Hank. However, Hank was still intoxicated by the delicious taste of fresh meat, unaware of everything behind it. He continued to enjoy every bite of food. Whoosh! Those screws flew out like arrows at a suffocating speed, directly piercing Ant-Man's head. A big hole instantly opened in his head, and red and white things splattered everywhere. Those little guys didn't stop there. They circled around and rushed back, repeatedly rotating and hitting the remaining part of Hank's head, as if they were executing some kind of cold order. After more than 10 seconds, the screws stopped, turned and hit the wall, stuck on it, leaving only little drops of blood dripping from it. A silver-haired man wearing a purple helmet, purple tights and a cloak walked in. He was tall and straight. He glanced at Ant-Man's body and then walked deeper into the room and said slowly, "It's really miserable. How could the king of a country fall into such a situation? The monsters left our city, and I took this opportunity to go out and search for survivors. I didn't expect to find that this pervert had tied you up and hid you here." Are you still alive? I've never said that, and I don't really want to say it, but we have to save the world. In the dark room, a black man with only one leg was tied to a metal table. His face was pale and haggard, but when he heard the sound beside his ears, his eyelids finally trembled slightly. Several people were walking in the canyon, and the sunlight shone through the narrow canyon, stretching their figures as if they were walking on the Golden Avenue. There are towering cliffs on both sides, rugged rocks, and the hard granite exudes a burning atmosphere under the sunlight. There are not even a few weeds here. Just a few dozen meters out of the canyon, Bayi suddenly raised the hand that was not holding the gun. The Punisher walking at the back of the team also dropped his big bag and took out the pistol from his waist to watch the surroundings vigilantly. What happened? Pietro looked around in confusion. There was not even a shadow of a bird here except the cliffs. They had just arrived inside the canyon through Dr. Doom's teleporter half a minute ago and had no idea where this place was. Have the zombies already caught up? Take the collar off his neck, Wanda. Certainly. Wanda stepped forward, stretched out a finger and pressed lightly on the collar a few times. The mutant limiter beeped twice and fell to the ground instantly. Before leaving, Fury had told them what the password was for the limiter, and violent disassembly would only cause it to explode. Beep, beep, don't move. If you move, I'll kill you. Suddenly there was a sharp whistle and a hoarse voice echoed in the canyon. At the exit of the canyon, a crowd of people poured out. When Bayi and others saw the group of people coming from the front of the canyon, their expressions were slightly stiff. These people's looks, clothes and even hairstyles were exactly the same, as if they were twins. When the group of people approached with weapons, Bayi could see clearly that their facial features were like exquisite replicas, with no trace of difference. Their eyes, noses, and mouths were all the same, and even the angle of the corners of their mouths when they smiled was different. Same. Needless to say, they were dressed in green jackets and black vests. There were 6 gold sequins on the vests, and the creases and stains were exactly the same. And the wood yellow sideburns. The only thing that distinguishes these people is the band on their forehead. This is the only thing that makes them look different. Some are colorful, plain, and some even draw various patterns with watercolor pens. Why does it feel familiar to me? Pietro frowned and muttered. He had indeed seen this person somewhere, but no, I'm too old. It can't be. While thinking, the dozen or so people had already walked in front of Bayi and the others, slowly spreading out to form a siege. What, are you all so scared? You don't even dare to say anything. Among them, the bearded man with a purple headband raised his eyebrows. It seems that these guys in front of them don't know who he is. I didn't expect that these days, there would be a kid who didn't even know who was in charge of the Tanabam Canyon and would dare to wander around in the Wasteland. It was really interesting. Hand over everything you have on you, and the Madrox gang will make your death more comfortable. Hand over everything you have on you, and the Madrox gang will make your death more comfortable. Hand over everything you have on you, and the Madrox gang will make your death more comfortable. The dozen or so people suddenly shouted in unison, and they all raised their hands and pointed their weapons at Bayi, but now they were more different. Among the dozen or so people, only 5 held shotguns, and they seemed to be old models with some rust. The rest only had axes and sticks, looking extremely poor. But Quicksilver didn't pay attention to these details. He widened his eyes and shouted in disbelief, "Jamie, is that you?" Bayi touched his chin, and his eyes were somewhat enlightened. He probably knew what world he had been transported to. But it still needs a little confirmation. Perhaps because he was afraid of talking too much and disturbing his ears, this time only the purple-banded man grinned and said, "We have nothing to do with that old man for a long time. I say it for the last time, hand over your things. That guy from the punishment gang, what's in that bag behind you?" "Food, water." He pointed the shotgun at Frank behind Bayi and asked, "Something that will kill you." The Punisher directly raised his gun and aimed it at Z-Band's head, and pulled the trigger without any hesitation. Fire erupted from the gun's muzzle, and Z-Band fell down. "Kill them!" The rest of the Madrox gang roared in unison, and Quicksilver started to move at this time. Perhaps because his leg injury was not completely healed, his speed was surprisingly slow, leaving only an unclear line. The afterimage crashed into those identical guys. The next moment, those people were knocked into the air and fell to the ground motionless, with a pool of blood flowing out from underneath them. Jamie needs more Jamie. One of them managed to get up, hit a rock hard, rushed forward, and hit his head violently on the rock. The dull sound of collision echoed in the air, and the next second, under the surprised eyes of everyone, the body of the Madrox gang suddenly twisted, as if torn apart by invisible force, and split into two people. This splitting process happened so suddenly and absurdly, as if it went against common sense. The two newly formed human bodies slowly recovered from the impact of the impact. They stood up separately, facing each other, and finally looked at Bayi and others. Bayi pressed a finger on his temple and frowned. "I've forgotten how capable clones are. We only need one living mouth to use as a tongue. You should come back first." Watching the afterimage return behind him, Bayi picked up the mutant limiter on the ground and walked towards the two people who had just split. "More. That's enough, thank you." Bayi raised his hand expressionlessly and fired a shot, hitting the one who wanted to hit the stone again. The other one quickly raised his hand to indicate that he would not make any move. James Arthur Jamie Madrox, the doppelganger of the X-Men, is as annoying as his name is. He can separate himself. Whenever he suffers a certain degree of physical impact, he will create a replica that is exactly the same as himself, and this is what makes him annoying. His clone can also copy itself in the same way. Each copy has an independent mind, but to some extent forms a spiritual link with other copies, which is why they can say the same thing together. The Punisher followed Bayi and shot every Jamie lying on the ground in the head to prevent them from standing up again. "You can't kill me. There are more people in the Madrox gang than you think. They will look for you." Snapped. Bayi raised his hand and gave the clone a big mouth while he was still defending, and then placed the mutant limiter on his neck. As the limiter beeped, Jamie's face turned pale. Bayi raised his hand and punched him on the head again. Seeing that the guy was no longer divided, he nodded with satisfaction and said, "I ask, you answer." "Okay. Well, who is the president now?" "Lord Red Skull." 40 years ago. The weather in New York City was sunny that day, with a maximum temperature of 26 degrees and a southwesterly wind. It was a good day for an outing. The Thunderbolts, a team handpicked from super-powered criminals, promised to use their abilities to complete the world's worst missions, somewhat similar to DC's Suicide Squad. Atlas, he's basically a Gigantamax with more bad morals. Like Zon Yin, she uses sound to fight, but she is more powerful and can create solid sound energy to attack enemies. Moonstone, also known as Ms. Marvel, can fly and emit energy. The X-Machine soldier wearing high-tech armor was once named Beetle. Citizen V wears a V-shaped metal mask on his face. This name has been passed down in the Watkins family for 3 generations. This team was going to Las Vegas with the Avengers for the first time that day to deal with villains. They wanted to prove their worth in this operation and prove that they had changed their past. At the intersection of Broadway Street and 7th Avenue, bustling citizens gathered in front of the classic Times Square screen. People stood in front of this eye-catching landmark, their eyes intently watching the urgent news that had just appeared on the big screen TV. Between light and shadow, Thor and the Absorbing Man engage in a fierce battle. Their figures jump out on the screen, making people feel like they are in an epic adventure. It's just that many people took a quick look and left in a hurry to go about their own business. Because everything looks the same as usual. Thanos, Galactus, and aliens of various colors failed to kill those heroes, and there will be no difference today. Until they attack at dusk. The first to fall was an aerospace aircraft carrier. It broke through the clouds at an extremely fast speed, rolled in the air, exploded and disintegrated continuously. The armor cracked instantly under the high temperature and pressure, and the fragments scattered in the air, turning into balls of burning flames. Along its path, the air was instantly drawn away, forming a huge vacuum area. In the end, it hit Times Square directly. Several tall buildings around it were instantly collapsed by the powerful impact, and half of the city was instantly wrapped in thick dust and smoke. The setting sun has begun to set, and its soft afterglow shines on the city that is gradually shrouded in darkness. On the silent streets, the surviving citizens have not yet recovered from the shock. What happened? Where is our hero? Why couldn't they stop this from happening? After a while, they returned to reality and began to cry and scream. As long as this happened, the superheroes would fly out as usual and save the world. When the roar of engines was heard in the distance, they raised their heads and looked at the sky. A group of fighter planes appeared on the distant skyline, their black outlines looming under the sunset. At first, those fighter planes were just vague black shadows, distant and tiny. Citizens speculated on their identities, with hope in their hearts, and cheers filled the streets. As the fighter plane gradually approached, the joy in their eyes was gradually replaced by gloom. When they caught a glimpse of the bright red and blood-like Hydra logo on the fighter plane's fuselage, fear quickly spread in their hearts. The cheers stopped abruptly and were replaced by dead silence. The last rays of the setting sun shone on the ground through the gaps in the black fighter wings, like the last faint ray of hope. However, blocked by these fighter planes, the light became weaker and weaker, and eventually disappeared. The Red Skull united all the villains he could contact, the Sinister Six, the Brotherhood, and the Demolition Squad to overwhelm the superheroes with their numbers and intelligence superiority. The Thunderbolts betrayed the Avengers. They helped Baron Zemo disguised as Citizen V to invade the Avengers' computer system, and then personally killed several Avengers just to survive. I remember that War Machine was killed after being hacked into the system. It's been so long that I can't remember. Thor was beaten to death by the Absorbed Man, and Captain America was strangled to death by the Red Skull on the steps of Congress. Anyway, on that day, the villains killed all the heroes in the world, then divided the world and turned it into a wasteland. The man with sideburns wearing the collar took a deep breath and looked at the man in front of him flatteringly. How about my historical results? Bayi smiled and put the muzzle of the gun against Jamie's forehead. 100%, but here's an additional question. Do you have the current map? Yes, on Jamie with the purple strap. He shouted hurriedly. The Punisher had already shot all the clones on the ground. He glanced coldly at Jamie at the end, then went to Ziddy's body and searched for the map. After looking at it carefully, Frank nodded to Bayi, indicating that there was nothing wrong with this thing. Although some of the specially marked locations above gave him a very bad feeling, what about Osborn City, Hammerfell City, and Hulkland? Brother, I've told you everything I know, but where did you come from and don't even know these things? Jamie, who was sitting on the stone, glanced at Jamie at his feet and the Jamie around him, then said to Bayi with a sad smile. Although the days when those superheroes existed are as far away as myths and legends, everyone knows how the world became like this back then. Today, the Madrox gang just killed a few people as usual, bought some goods, and then went to the bar to have a good time. They had been doing this kind of work for more than 10 years, but they didn't expect to get kicked out of the Iron Plate. But this kind of thing is nothing unusual in this world. Back then, Magneto killed his children and joined the Red Skull, claiming to make mutants great again. What happened? There should be no more than 50 mutants in the world now, maybe even less. In addition, why did the silver-haired man and red-haired woman in front of him look more and more familiar? Thinking about it, the clone's head hurt, and he couldn't help but cover his forehead. In the past 40 years, the Madrox gang has been constantly replicating themselves in order to ensure their status in the Wasteland. Their thoughts and memories have been torn apart bit by bit because of this abuse of mutant abilities. But the thing is that X-Men Jamie from 40 years ago. He tore himself apart desperately to save his friends, and then forced those clones that were unwilling to split to fight Hydra, which ultimately caused the bad Jamies, who far outnumbered the good ones, to fall to Hydra. Originally, Our Lord Skeleton planned to clear out the clones when the overall situation was decided, but these guys killed 1 and 10 of them popped up, and they were still mutants being covered by Magneto. At the same time, they didn't have any big ambitions, so they just went with it. They left, eventually forming the Madrox gang today. Yeah, Bayi didn't answer, but took the map and looked at it carefully. When Dr. Doom teleported them into this world, he didn't come with a functioning teleporter. Is that okay? This is not good. The Earth 807128 universe, which is the Wasteland world where Bayi and others are now located, has a timeline farther back than the 2149 zombie universe 40 years ago, but not too much. The Wasteland universe is definitely not a place suitable for living and working in peace and contentment. The vast majority of people here are living a life like in Mad Max. They have no food and clothing, and have to fight for a drink of clean water. Magneto, Dr. Doom, and even Dr. Lizard, those who contributed a lot to the day when the heroes fell, all received a territory assigned by the Red Skull, with the exception of the Hulk. The way Banner acquires territory in this universe is a little different. I heard that the Red Skull did not hesitate to throw a high-yield nuclear bomb at Hulk at the beginning, but it was a pity that he could not kill him. Jamie shuddered, as if recalling a frightening past event. He couldn't help but close his eyes. A trace of fear appeared on his face. Wanda walked over, frowned and asked, "Why do you say that?" No matter what, Dr. Banner is a member of the Avengers, and surviving the first round of attacks is definitely a good thing. Does the doppelganger want Banner dead because he is a villain? But he was being tortured at this time, so he wouldn't show his emotions like this, right? She couldn't figure it out. Because Banner didn't die that day, but he was deeply injured. Some people said that his brain was burned out by nuclear radiation, and he turned into a complete beast after that. I think you are already a beast like this. You have turned from an X-Men into a robber and gangster. Pietro snorted coldly. You've never dealt with the Hulk gang, have you, buddy? The clone's lips trembled slightly. He opened his eyes and cast his bitter eyes on Quicksilver, took a deep breath and said again. After waking up from the nuclear explosion, Hulk rushed to save his cousin She-Hulk. Pietro nodded with satisfaction. This is what a hero does. Quote. Then he fell in love with her. According to Banner, She-Hulk is the only person in the world who can stand him. In the decades that followed, these two men continued to work like crazy, creating a Hulk gang with thousands of people. Each of them inherited their father's abilities, and their personalities were exactly the same. Finally, those cubs also started to give birth, and more of them were born. President Skeleton was so frightened that he assigned all the westernmost states of the United States to Banner, and asked him to be the local landlord to collect rent. Quote, My life has been like this since then. There were dozens of Jamies who wanted to expand their business there, but they were all eaten by the Hulk gang. After listening to the clone's explanation, everyone except Bayi was a little confused. What Jamie said sounded too incredible and unbelievable. But when I thought about it, I had just escaped from a universe with a lot of super-powered zombies, and the story became very reasonable and heartwarming. Big brother, don't laugh at the second brother. Ahem. Anyway, if you guys have anything else you want to ask, old Jamie will tell you everything he knows. Seeing that the people in front of him no longer seemed to be interested in him, the clone said quickly. He didn't have the habit of leaving anyone alive when he blocked roads and robbed people in this area before, but occasionally, if he met an interesting guy, he would still let that person live. He just wants to be a very interesting person now. Frank, who had been silent for a long time, raised his head and asked, Well, how did the Punisher die? Ah, there's Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch. Pietro raised his hand from behind. The Punisher. I heard that he was killed by the Hunter Craven that day. Some people said that he was still alive, but it must be false. The clone touched his mustache and recalled. As for the brother and sister, one was killed by Magneto, and the other had his legs broken by the Sandman, and then Atlas trampled them to death. Everyone was silent after listening to the clone's words. After a long time, Kuayin managed to laugh. Looking on the bright side, this is much better than us being eaten by zombies or turning into zombies. The clone was horrified, his heart stopped for half a beat, and all the blood in his body seemed to freeze. He raised his head and looked at the people in front of him, their eyes widening wider and wider. There was a silver-haired man in tights with blue background and silver stripes, a strong man with a skull on his chest, a red-haired woman in a red robe, and a guy who I really couldn't recognize. He realized that he knew something he shouldn't know. Could it be that those Avengers were not dead at all back then, or were they resurrected and returned to this world as usual? His lips trembled slightly, and he struggled to say a few words. I remember them all, Quicksilver, the Punisher, and the Scarlet Witch. Is there anything else you want to ask? Bayi suddenly walked over and put the muzzle of the gun against the clone's forehead. Frank hesitated, then finally shook his head, indicating that he had no questions. Wanda and Quicksilver also shook their heads. The clone felt the cold muzzle of the gun, and he screamed in horror, "Wait! I won't tell the Red Skull." But before his voice could spread throughout the canyon, Bayi had already pulled the trigger without hesitation. The gunshot pierced the air, and a flame spurted out from the muzzle. The next second, blood splashed everywhere, and broken bones and pieces of flesh flew in the air. The clone suddenly took a few steps back, and finally fell heavily to the ground, without any further movement. Bayi glanced at the corpse on the ground, then looked at the muzzle of the gun in his hand that was still radiating heat. He thought to himself that a large caliber gun was better after all, and the blood spray looked better than before. Putting the gun back into his waist, he looked at the three people who were still silent and asked, "Do you have any ideas or plans for this world now?" Frank was the first to speak, and his answer did not surprise Bayi: "Kill every fool in the Wasteland." "A different world. This world sounds and looks terrible," Pietro whispered. Wanda looked at the two of them, thought for a moment and then replied, "We failed to protect the civilians of our universe, and I don't want to see the people of this world either." Looking at the people with different opinions in front of him, Bayi nodded and smiled. "That's good, let's go to Canada." Several other people looked at each other with doubtful expressions. They didn't understand why Bayi chose to go to Canada. They had been operating in the United States and didn't know much about Canada. The Punisher's brows were furrowed and the corners of his mouth were slightly bent, showing confusion. He raised a hand and gently pressed his eyebrows with his index finger. After thinking for a moment, he finally couldn't help but question, "Why did you choose to go to Canada?" He really couldn't figure out why he wanted to go there. There were obviously countless criminals and villains to kill here, so why bother looking far away? Bayi picked up the map in his hand, unfolded it gently, and motioned for others to approach him and explained. "Although we have the drawings of the teleporter, given by Doom before, leaving this universe requires a lot of materials, energy and technology. Most of them are firmly in the hands of the Bad Earth warlords. If we want to build a teleporter, we will conflict with them. And once the four of us make some Avengers noise, the Red Skull will most likely gather his old friends, to surround us. One Hulk gang alone will be enough for us. Also, even if we choose to live quietly and talk about it, no one would want to do this, right? They won't let us go easily, just like Logan. His life has not been easy in the past few decades. The Wolverine of this universe is still alive." Pietro blinked. "Yes, but that's not the point. The point is that I already have a complete plan." Finally, Bayi first clicked on Hulk Land, then moved his finger to an area in the Canadian Rockies on the map, and stopped. There are two small purple characters marked there, Zemo. Who is Baron Zemo? The active years of the first-generation Heinrich Zemo can be traced back to the Second World War. He is a popular figure in the eyes of Mustache. The titles accumulated through 12 generations have made him deeply trusted by Hydra and the Third Reich. To be honest, Zemo was not very interested in fighting Comrade Xiamen at first. He was a scientist and a hereditary nobleman. Fighting in person would be a disgrace to his family's tricolor flag. It wasn't until the 1940s that Fury led the Howling Commandos he formed into Zemo's hometown and blew up the cannon he was developing, causing Zemo to abscond with his wife and children and become wanted around the world. In order to hide his identity, Zemo put on a purple mask with special lines on it that looked like Thanos' chin. A few years later, Captain America broke into the laboratory where he developed Adhesive X. During the battle, Heinrich accidentally came into contact with Adhesive X, which caused the mask to completely stick to his head and disfigured him. From then on, the Zemo family had a complete feud with Captain America. As a result, a few years later, Captain America suddenly froze and hibernated in the Arctic. But Zemo didn't know that. He was depressed for a long time because he couldn't kill his enemy. After the destruction of the Third Reich, he went to South America to build a small country to amuse himself. After finally surviving to modern times, he heard that after the American team woke up from the Ice Bucket Challenge, he immediately brought manpower to fight with them, but he died from the new generation of sky-blasting cannon he developed. The second generation, the one with the most achievements and the highest reputation in the entire Zemo family, Helmut Zemo. In this universe, he single-handedly planned the day the heroes fell with the Red Skull. They realized that each hero had several villains exclusive to him, so they united all the villains and exchanged opponents. The interesting point is that the method used by the villains to defeat the heroes was actually discovered from the computer in the Avengers mansion. An Avenger with astonishing wisdom was really uneasy about his teammates and secretly wrote something in the computer. Get rid of all the superheroes' weaknesses. This ultimately led to a successful Tower of Babel incident against the Avengers. After it was done, Zemo wanted very little and only took a small piece of Canadian territory as his own fiefdom. This made the Red Skull very satisfied, everyone from Magneto and Osborn's greedy guys. I want 7 or 8 states. In the endless wasteland desert, a jeep with a somewhat shabby appearance was running wildly, its wheels leaving deep imprints on the rugged sand, and the blazing sunlight reflected on the car body, shining with dazzling light. Frank was driving, while Bayi was sitting in the passenger seat with his eyes closed and concentrating. They were on the north side of South Dakota, on their way to North Dakota. This jeep was one of the scooters parked outside the canyon by the Madrox gang. Apart from this one, there were only 2 small modified school buses left. The smell of it made people pinch their noses and frown. After the jeep passed through the desolate desert, the scene on the west side of a mountain suddenly appeared in front of them. 4 huge human heads are carved on one side of the mountain, with lifelike faces, as if they are telling ancient legends to these passengers. Bayi's eyes were still closed, as if all this had become commonplace for him. Quicksilver in the back seat stuck his head out curiously and observed the heads carefully. However, as the jeep continued to move forward, the people on board discovered that a skull was carved on the right side of the 4th head. The skull was obviously newer and taller than the other statues. He turned to look at Scarlet Witch, and she was also looking at the skull. Both of them were speechless. Was there the sound of a motorcycle just now? Bayi, who was in the passenger seat, suddenly opened his eyes and said, reaching for the gun at his waist with his right hand, looking around alertly. Amid the roar of the engine, his enhanced hearing seemed to separate a different sound. Frank, who was in the driver's seat, glanced at the White Knight and immediately understood his intention. He stepped on the accelerator without hesitation, and the jeep engine roared and drove quickly towards President Mountain. You cannot be exposed to the enemy's sight. You must find a favorable position to avoid being attacked from both sides. The jeep finally stopped on the side of the mountain, hidden in the shadow of the slope. Several people got out of the car and stood ready. Soon, a large group of thugs on motorcycles rushed out from behind the distant slope. They were dressed in shabby leather clothes and had white skulls painted on their faces, as if they were demons in the wasteland. But the most shocking thing is that their motorcycle tires have continuous burning flames. The tires of the motorcycle were burning with blazing flames, and the burning color was intertwined with the red and golden colors of the wasteland, making it extremely dazzling. Flames spurted out from the rear of the motorcycle, forming a colorful tail flame, as magnificent as a raging fire raging in the wasteland. The thugs were riding motorcycles and approaching the jeep at high speeds. The iron chain whirled and rotated in the air, making a harsh whistling sound. The spikes on it shone with cold light, like the tentacles of a demon. What are they doing? How do you say that word? Cosplay Ghost Rider. Pietro looked at the group of people getting closer and closer, with a strange look on his face. This was the third weird thing he saw today, after the doppelganger and the Red Skull statue. HMPH, then they forgot to put a light on their heads. The Punisher grabbed a rifle and sneered. Bayi shrugged and said, although they look funny in their clothes, the Evil Spirit Gang can be said to be one of the big gangs in this wasteland. In addition, there are the Hulk Gang and the Punishment Gang, and the Doppelganger Gang should also be counted. They will never be able to kill them all. The thugs screamed and rushed towards Bayi and others. Frank raised his gun and started shooting. The precise bullets directly killed several thugs. Their bodies fell to the ground, and the wasteland was dyed red with blood. The remaining thugs were even angrier. They drove their motorcycles forward even more manically, regardless of the death of their partners. However, Bayi fired steadily again, hitting the vital points of several thugs. They fell instantly, the motorcycle lost control and crashed onto the sand. At this time, only the last two thugs were still rushing over. As soon as Wanda raised her hand, the two motorcycles were suddenly lifted off the ground by an invisible force, and they struggled in horror. The next second, the two motorcycles were violently thrown to the ground. There was a loud noise, broken metal and debris flew everywhere, and deep holes were knocked out of the ground. Sand and dust filled the air, and the still living thugs groaned in pain. What a big gang! Huayin twitched the corner of his mouth and complained. One of the thugs raised his upper body, spat out a few teeth and blood, and then spoke with difficulty, "You. How much did the Madrox gang spend to invite you here?" His voice was hoarse and full of resentment. "I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more."